Gunshots ripped through the warm evening air at Luigi's restaurant in Boston. As the smoke cleared, a small woman stood amid three fallen attackers. Retired Colonel Frank Sullivan, 72, stared at her with disbelief in his weathered eyes. "Rachel," he whispered, "you have your father's eyes." Before she could respond, he collapsed, blood spreading across his shirt. Clutched in his hand was a metal fragment bearing the inscription, "Quicksilver, Samara, 2/27/91." The final secret of Desert Storm was about to be revealed. The Tuesday night crowd at Luigi's was typical for early March in Boston, a mix of regulars seeking comfort food and tourists drawn by the restaurant's storied history and military memorabilia. Bronze plaques, faded photographs, and shadow boxes containing medals lined the walls, silent testimonials to the owner's pride in American military tradition. Major Rachel Morgan sat alone at a corner table, her back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room, a habit formed through multiple deployments with the 75th Ranger Regiment. At 34, her athletic build and confident posture betrayed her military background, despite the casual civilian clothes she wore. 3 weeks back from Syria, she still felt the phantom weight of body armor and heard echoes of gunfire in ordinary sounds. Her fingers unconsciously traced the worn edges of her father's Timex watch, the only personal item of his she possessed. The watch had stopped at 2:27, the exact time his helicopter had reportedly crashed in the Iraqi desert 32 years ago. Rachel had never known her father beyond the official photographs and the stories her mother had reluctantly shared, yet she'd followed him into military service, driven by an inexplicable need to understand the man who had become a ghost in her life. Across the room, Colonel Frank Sullivan watched her with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. His weathered face, mapped with deep lines earned through decades of service, reflected internal conflict, a man seeing a ghost from his past. He nursed a glass of bourbon, his third, trying to summon the courage to approach her. Luigi Gennaro, 78 years old, and still commanding his restaurant like a military operation, noticed the colonel's interest in the young woman. Few knew that Luigi had served as a Green Beret during the Cold War, operating behind enemy lines in Eastern Europe. Fewer still knew that his restaurant doubled as an unofficial meeting ground for veterans who preferred to share their stories away from civilian ears. "Another bourbon, Colonel?" Luigi asked, his accent still carrying traces of his Sicilian heritage despite 50 years in America. "No thanks, old friend," Frank replied, his eyes never leaving Rachel. "I think I've found something I've been looking for a very long time." Luigi followed his gaze. "The young lady, she's been coming in for about a week. Always alone, always watches the door. Military, definitely." "Not just military," Frank said quietly. "That's Jonathan Morgan's daughter." Luigi's expression hardened. "Morgan, the one from Quicksilver." Frank nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "The very same." Before their conversation could continue, the front door burst open. 3 men in expensive suits entered their movements, betraying a predatory confidence that immediately set both veterans on edge. William Sutherland, tall and commanding with silver-streaked hair, led the trio. James Blackwood, athletically built with cold blue eyes, flanked his right. Eric Porter, younger than the others, with a perpetual sneer, completed the group. Rachel noticed them immediately. Her hand instinctively moved toward her hip before remembering she wasn't carrying. Something about their movements, the way they scanned the room, how they positioned themselves, triggered her combat instincts. These weren't ordinary businessmen. The newcomers approached a young couple seated near the center of the restaurant. The woman, barely in her 20s, visibly tensed as Sutherland leaned over her chair. "Emily," he said, voice carrying across the now quieting restaurant. "Your father sends his regards." "Please, "Leave us alone," her companion said, rising halfway from his seat. "We're just having dinner." "Sit down, son," Blackwood said, placing a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder. "This doesn't concern you." Porter laughed, the sound lacking any warmth. "Unless you want to make it concern you." Rachel watched as the situation escalated, noting how restaurant staff retreated behind the counter. The couple was clearly frightened, the woman's eyes darting around the room in search of help. When her gaze met Rachel's, the terror was unmistakable. Frank Sullivan recognized the approaching confrontation and reached for his phone. But before he could call for help, he saw Rachel stand and move toward the developing situation. Her movements were fluid, controlled, a predator entering the field. He knew those movements. He'd seen them before in another desert landscape, from another Morgan. "Excuse me," Rachel said, her voice carrying a command presence that cut through the tension. "I think you gentlemen need to leave these people alone." The three men turned, clearly surprised by the interruption. Sutherland looked Rachel up and down dismissively. "Mind your business, sweetheart," he said. "This is a private conversation." "Not in a public restaurant," Rachel replied evenly. "And not when it involves intimidation." Porter stepped toward her, invading her personal space. "What are you going to do about it, little lady?" Frank watched from across the room, every muscle tensed. He recognized the dangerous calm in Rachel's expression, the same look he'd seen on her father's face 32 years ago in the deserts of Iraq. "I'm asking you politely to step back," Rachel said, her voice never rising. "This is your only warning." Porter laughed and placed his hand on Rachel's shoulder, intending to push her aside. It was the last mistake he would make that evening. Rachel's response was immediate and devastating. Her left hand gripped Porter's wrist, applying precise pressure to nerve clusters, while her right hand executed a perfect joint manipulation. Porter found himself face down on the restaurant floor before his brain registered what had happened. Blackwood reached inside his jacket, but Rachel was already moving. A precise strike to his solar plexus doubled him over, followed by a sweeping leg technique that sent him crashing into a nearby table. Sutherland, recognizing he was facing a trained combatant, attempted to create distance. Rachel intercepted him with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of training. 3 quick strikes later, he joined his companions on the floor. The entire confrontation lasted less than 15 seconds. Luigi had already grabbed the restaurant phone, but instead of calling police, he was calling a specific number known to few civilians, a direct line to Boston PD's Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, a fellow veteran who understood situations that required discretion. Rachel checked on the young couple, ensuring they were unharmed. The restaurant had fallen completely silent, patrons frozen between fear and amazement at what they'd witnessed. Frank Sullivan rose slowly from his seat, eyes fixed on Rachel. In her movements, he had seen the ghost of her father. The same precision, the same controlled violence. As he approached, Rachel turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Do I know you, sir?" she asked, still positioned between the downed attackers and the young couple. "No," Frank replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I knew your father. You fight just like him." Rachel's expression changed instantly, surprise, suspicion, and a flash of pain crossing her features in rapid succession. "My father." For a heartbeat, Rachel was 8 years old again, sitting on her mother's lap, as 2 solemn officers delivered the news that would forever divide her life into before and after. The folded flag, the empty casket, the stone at Arlington with her father's name that she'd visited every year on his birthday, bringing the same question: who were you really? Before Frank could respond, he noticed movement from Porter on the floor. The man's hand emerged from his jacket, gripping a small-caliber pistol. Without hesitation, Frank lunged forward, shoving Rachel aside as the weapon discharged. Pain bloomed in Frank's chest as he fell against a nearby table. Rachel immediately disarmed Porter with a vicious wrist lock that ended with an audible snap. As restaurant patrons screamed and sought cover, Rachel turned her attention to Frank, who had slumped to the floor. "Stay with me," she said, applying pressure to the wound. "Help is coming." Frank's vision began to blur, but he reached into his pocket and pressed something into Rachel's hand. "Quicksilver," he whispered. "Your father, still alive." Rachel looked down at the object in her palm, a worn metal dog tag fragment with the inscription, "Quicksilver, Samara, 22791. Before she could question him further, the restaurant doors burst open as police officers flooded the scene, led by a man whose bearing immediately identified him as a fellow veteran. Detective Lieutenant Marcus Hayes had seen his share of violence during 25 years with the Boston Police Department, but the scene at Luigi's was unusual even by his standards. 3 men in expensive suits lay subdued on the floor, one nursing what appeared to be a broken wrist. A retired military officer, identified by Luigi as Colonel Frank Sullivan, was being loaded onto a stretcher with a gunshot wound to the chest. And standing calmly in the center of the chaos was a woman who had, according to multiple witnesses, disabled 3 armed men in less than 15 seconds. "Major Morgan," Hayes said, approaching Rachel after the preliminary scene assessment. At 65, Hayes moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had spent decades in both military and law enforcement. His time as a Marine in Grenada had left him with a slight limp and an instinctive recognition of fellow warriors. "Luigi says you're 75th Ranger Regiment." Rachel nodded, her expression neutral. "Recently returned from overseas deployment." Hayes gestured toward the 3 men being handcuffed by his officers. "Want to tell me what happened here?" "They were harassing that young couple," Rachel replied, indicating Emily and her companion, who were giving statements to another officer. "When I intervened, they escalated to physical threats. I defended myself and others using appropriate force." "Appropriate force?" Hayes repeated with a hint of a smile. 3 trained operatives taken down by a woman half their size. That's some appropriate force. Rachel's expression didn't change. "They're not random thugs. The way they moved, their situational awareness, they're trained, military or private security." Hayes nodded, having noticed the same details. "And the colonel, how does he fit into this?" Rachel hesitated. "I don't know. He claimed to know my father, then took a bullet meant for me." She didn't mention the metal fragment or what Sullivan had whispered to her. Some instinct warned her to keep that information private. "Your father was military?" Hayes asked, making notes. "Colonel Jonathan Morgan, Delta Force, killed in a helicopter crash in Iraq in 1991 during the Gulf War." Hayes looked up sharply. "Jonathan Morgan, I remember that name. His unit did some joint operations with Marine Force Recon during Desert Storm. He had quite a reputation." "So I've been told," Rachel said. "I was 3 when he died. Don't remember him." In truth, she'd spent her entire life trying to piece together the man who'd become almost mythical in her mind. Her mother had rarely spoken of him, as if the pain was too raw, even decades later. What little Rachel knew came from old comrades, who seemed to measure their words carefully, as if there were things about Jonathan Morgan better left unsaid. Their conversation was interrupted by a paramedic approaching from the ambulance. "Detective Colonel Sullivan is asking for the major before we transport." Hayes nodded. "Make it quick." Rachel followed the paramedic to the ambulance, where Frank Sullivan lay on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his face, and pressure bandages on his chest. His complexion was alarmingly gray, but his eyes were alert, focused intently on her as she approached. He pulled the mask aside. "Hospital. St. Elizabeth's." He managed, his breathing labored. "Room 412, Eleanor Reed." "Who is she?" Rachel asked. "She'll explain. Trust no one else." His fingers clutched at her wrist with surprising strength. "They're cleaning house after all these years." What was Quicksilver?" Frank's eyes locked onto hers. "Your father's mission, the one that didn't exist." His grip tightened. "They're hunting us down. The 7 who knew." The paramedic intervened. "We need to move him now." As they loaded Frank into the ambulance, Rachel turned to find Hayes watching her closely. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," Rachel lied smoothly. "He's confused from the blood loss." Hayes didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. "We'll need your formal statement, but it can wait until tomorrow. I know you want to get to the hospital." "Thank you," Rachel said, grateful for the understanding. As Hayes turned to coordinate the scene processing, Rachel slipped the metal fragment into her pocket, mind racing with questions. Her father had been dead for 32 years, or so she'd been told. But Sullivan's words suggested a very different reality. Outside Luigi's, a black SUV with darkened windows idled across the street. Inside, a man watched the activity through a high-powered monocular, paying particular attention to Rachel as she declined a police escort and walked toward her parked motorcycle. He lifted a secure phone to his ear. "Confirmation on Morgan's daughter. She's made contact with Sullivan." The voice that responded was cold, authoritative. "Understood. Maintain surveillance. Do not engage." "And Sullivan? He took a bullet. If he survives, we'll handle him at the hospital." The call ended. The observer returned to his surveillance as Rachel Morgan mounted her motorcycle and disappeared into the Boston night. Unaware, she was now part of an operation 3 decades in the making. The emergency room at St. Elizabeth's Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Frank Sullivan was wheeled in medical personnel swarming around the gurney. Rachel followed as far as she was permitted before being directed to a waiting area. The bullet had entered his upper chest, missing his heart, but causing significant blood loss. The next few hours would be critical. Rachel found a quiet corner and examined the metal fragment Sullivan had given her. It appeared to be a portion of a military dog tag that had been deliberately cut. The inscription, "Quicksilver, Samara, 02/27/91, was stamped into the metal. The date placed it during the final days of Operation Desert Storm, around the time her father had reportedly died. She removed her father's Timex from her wrist, studying it as she had countless times before. The watch had belonged to her grandfather before him, passed down when Jonathan Morgan had graduated from West Point. The timepiece was old, even then, its mechanical movement a relic from another era. Her mother had given it to her on her 18th birthday, the same day Rachel had announced her intention to enlist. "He would have wanted you to have it," her mother had said, eyes brimming with unshed tears. But there had been something else in her expression, too. A flicker of fear that Rachel had never understood. Rachel tried to access military databases through her phone, but found nothing under Operation Quicksilver. This wasn't surprising. Black operations rarely appeared in accessible records. What troubled her more was Sullivan's claim that her father might still be alive. Rachel had grown up believing Jonathan Morgan died a hero, his body never recovered from a helicopter crash in the Iraqi desert. Her mother had received a folded flag and condolences from a grateful nation. There was even a memorial stone at Arlington. But there had never been a body. No physical proof. Just official reports and solemn assurances. After 2 hours, A surgeon emerged to inform her that Sullivan had survived the surgery but remained in critical condition. He wouldn't be conscious for several hours, possibly not until morning. "Is there a Dr. Eleanor Reed working here?" Rachel asked the nurse at the station. The nurse checked her computer. "Yes, but she's not on shift until tomorrow morning. She works in research, not patient care." Rachel nodded her thanks and decided to return in the morning. As she turned to leave, she noticed two men in dark suits entering the emergency department, their manner setting off immediate alarm bells. They moved with the same disciplined awareness she had observed in the men at the restaurant. Keeping her head down, Rachel walked briskly toward a side exit, using other visitors as visual cover. Once outside, she circled around to observe the men from a distance. They spoke briefly with hospital security, showing identification that granted them immediate cooperation. One remained in the lobby, while the other headed toward the elevators. A chill ran down Rachel's spine. Sullivan had been right. Someone was cleaning house, and they were extraordinarily efficient. Within hours of the incident at Luigi's, they had traced Sullivan to the hospital and deployed personnel to deal with him. This wasn't the work of a small group. This was a coordinated operation with significant resources. Trusting her instincts, Rachel made a quick decision. She couldn't return to her apartment. If these people knew about her connection to Sullivan, they likely knew where she lived. She needed a secure location to process what she'd learned and plan her next steps. 30 minutes later, Rachel checked into a small motel on the outskirts of Boston using cash and a reserve identity, contingency measures from her military training that now seemed prescient. In her room, she spread out what little information she had and began the methodical process of constructing a timeline. Her father, Colonel Jonathan Morgan, had been reported killed on February 28, 1991, during the final days of Operation Desert Storm. Frank Sullivan apparently served with him and knew about something called Quicksilver, involving the Iraqi city of Samarra on February 27th, the day before her father's reported death. Sullivan had mentioned 7 who knew and claimed they were being cleaned up after all these years. Rachel opened her laptop and began researching Frank Sullivan, finding his service record impressive but heavily redacted. Delta Force operator during the 1980s and early 90s, including Desert Storm. Retired as a full colonel in 1995. Since then, he had lived quietly in Boston, occasionally teaching military history at a local university. She closed her eyes, trying to recall every story she'd ever heard about her father. The pieces never quite fit, the official narrative always containing small inconsistencies that most people wouldn't notice. How her mother would sometimes slip and speak of him in the present tense even years after his death. How certain questions about his service would be met with uncharacteristic evasion by his former colleagues. Next, she searched for news reports of recent deaths of Gulf War veterans, particularly those with special operations backgrounds. A pattern emerged that sent a chill down her spine. Within the past year, 5 decorated veterans of Desert Storm had died. 3 from apparent heart attacks, 1 in a car accident and 1 in a home invasion gone wrong. All had served in special operations units. All deaths appeared unremarkable in isolation, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. Rachel's phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unknown number. Sullivan in post-op recovery. 2 men in suits standing guard. Not hospital security. Not police. She stared at the message, weighing possibilities. It could be a trap, but it could also be an ally. Perhaps Lieutenant Hayes or someone from Luigi's. She replied cautiously, "Who is this?" The response came quickly. "Friend of Luigi's. He suggested you might need eyes inside. I'm a nurse in the ICU." Rachel decided to take a calculated risk. What's happening with Sullivan? Stable but critical. The suits are preventing all access except essential medical personnel. They claimed federal authority. This confirmed Rachel's suspicions. Someone powerful wanted to control access to Sullivan, either to silence him or to use him as bait. She texted back, "Is there a Dr. Eleanor Reed there? Not on shift until 7 a.m. Research Department, 4th floor. Thanks. Stay clear of this. Could be dangerous." Rachel put down her phone and continued her research. She found a Dr. Eleanor Reed listed as a research scientist, specializing in biological agents and chemical weapons countermeasures at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Her biography mentioned previous work with the Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Another connection to the military, possibly to whatever Quicksilver had been. As midnight approached, a memory surfaced. Her mother receiving a phone call on the 10th anniversary of her father's death. Rachel had been 13, awakened by her mother's muffled sobbing. She'd crept to the landing and overheard fragments. "I can't keep doing this. The children deserve to know. How much longer?" The next morning, her mother had been red-eyed, but refused to discuss the call, and Rachel had eventually filed it away as just another mystery surrounding her father's death. Around midnight, Rachel's instincts alerted her to movement outside her room. Peering through the curtains, she spotted a black SUV slowly cruising through the parking lot. She quickly gathered her essentials, slipped out the bathroom window, and disappeared into the night before they could confirm her location. She spent the rest of the night moving between public locations, using techniques honed during multiple deployments to avoid surveillance. By dawn, she had a new burner phone, a change of clothes purchased from an all-night store, and a plan to meet Dr. Eleanor Reed when she arrived for her shift. Rachel positioned herself near the staff entrance of St. Elizabeth's Hospital at 6:30 a.m., wearing scrubs purchased from a medical supply store and a fake ID badge that would pass casual inspection. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and non-prescription glasses altered her appearance enough to avoid immediate recognition. At 6:52 a.m., a woman in her late 60s approached the entrance. She matched the photo Rachel had found online of Dr. Eleanor Reed. Silver hair cut in a practical bob, thin framed glasses, and the purposeful walk of someone who had spent decades navigating hospital corridors. Rachel noted the woman's situational awareness, how she scanned her surroundings in a pattern that suggested military training rather than civilian caution. Rachel timed her approach to coincide with a group of arriving staff falling into step beside Dr. Reed as they passed through the doors. "Dr. Reed," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you about Frank Sullivan and Operation Quicksilver." Eleanor Reed froze momentarily, then continued walking without looking at Rachel. "4th floor research library. 10 minutes. Come alone, or don't come at all." Rachel nodded and separated from the group, taking the stairs rather than the elevator to avoid security cameras. When she reached the research library, she found it empty except for Dr. Reed, who stood by a window overlooking the parking lot, her back to the door. "Close it," Reed said without turning. Rachel shut the door and remained near it, maintaining a clear exit path, a habit from years of operational security. Reed finally turned to face her, studying her intently. "You're Jonathan's daughter. I can see him in your face." "You knew my father," Rachel said, neither a question nor a statement. "Yes, and Frank Sullivan, and 5 others who no longer have the luxury of conversation." Reed's voice carried the weight of decades. "How much did Frank tell you?" "Almost nothing. Just Quicksilver Samara 22791, and that my father might still be alive." Reed closed her eyes briefly. "That fool. Always believed in redemption." She sighed heavily. "I've been waiting 32 years for this conversation, but I'd hoped to have it under better circumstances." "What was Quicksilver?" Rachel demanded. "Not here," Reed replied, glancing toward the ceiling where security cameras might be hidden. We need to move. Sullivan is still unconscious but stable. The men guarding him are not federal agents despite their credentials. I checked. Who are they? Same people who killed Michael Torres last month. Heart attack, supposedly. And David Reynolds 3 months ago. Car accident. And Sarah Blackwood in December. Home invasion. Reed's expression hardened. All members of Operation Quicksilver. Now they're after Frank and me, the last ones left. And my father. Reed's expression softened slightly. That's complicated. We need to go somewhere secure to talk. Where? There's a place in Beacon Hill, old gas station owned by a friend. Vietnam veteran knows how to keep secrets. Reed checked her watch. I'll create a distraction. Meet me at the corner of Cambridge and Charles in 30 minutes. Rachel nodded, understanding the tactics. What kind of distraction? A thin smile crossed Reed's face. I'm a research scientist, specializing in biological agents. I have options. 25 minutes later, alarms blared throughout St. Elizabeth's Hospital as a containment breach was reported in the research wing. Staff and visitors evacuated in controlled chaos, emergency protocols activated across all departments. Rachel slipped out with a group of administrative staff, noting the confusion had drawn the attention of the men who had been guarding Sullivan. She reached the designated corner 5 minutes early and waited constantly, scanning for surveillance or pursuit. At precisely the appointed time, a battered Ford pickup pulled alongside her Dr. Reed at the wheel. Get in, Reed ordered. We don't have much time. Rachel complied, and they drove in silence through Boston's morning traffic. Reed navigated with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the city's layout, taking several unexpected turns that would reveal any tale. Anyone following? Reed asked, eyes on the road. Not that I can detect, Rachel replied, still watching through the side mirror. What did you do back there? Released a harmless but dramatic smoke compound into the ventilation system. Triggered all the biological containment protocols. It'll take them hours to clear the building and determine there was no actual biohazard. By then, we'll be long gone. They arrived at an old gas station in Beacon Hill, its faded sign reading, Thompson's Service and Repair. The building looked like it had seen better days, but Rachel noted the modern security cameras discreetly positioned around the perimeter and the reinforced door frames. Security measures not typical for an ordinary repair shop. An elderly man emerged from the garage as they parked, wiping his hands on a rag. Despite his 75 years, Eddie Thompson stood straight, his weathered face a map of experiences that had shaped American history. A Vietnam veteran who had flown helicopter missions during the Tet Offensive, he had returned home to run his father's gas station and create a sanctuary for fellow veterans. Eleanor, he greeted Reed with a nod. This her, Jonathan Morgan's daughter, Reed confirmed. Eddie studied Rachel with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Got your father's look about you, the way you carry yourself. He gestured toward the building. Come on in. Coffee's hot. The interior of the gas station belied its exterior. Behind the public area with its snack displays and automotive supplies was a comfortable room lined with military memorabilia spanning decades of American conflicts. A ham radio set occupied one corner, various frequencies quietly monitored through headphones hanging nearby. Eddie maintains communication with a network of veterans, Reed explained, seeing Rachel's interest in the equipment. Old-school methods that don't leave digital footprints. Can't hack a frequency if you don't know we're using it, Eddie added, pouring coffee into mugs that bore the insignia of different military branches. He handed Rachel one with the Ranger tab. Figure this is appropriate. Rachel accepted the mug, increasingly certain she had stepped into a world that had existed parallel to her own for decades. A shadow network of veterans maintaining vigilance long after their official service had ended. "Time to tell her," Eddie said to Reed as they settled around a table that had clearly hosted similar conversations for generations. Eleanor Reed clasped her hands around her mug, gathering thoughts cultivated over 32 years of silence. "Operation Quicksilver was never supposed to exist," she began. "No papers, no records, no acknowledgement. 7 of us were selected for a mission so sensitive that even Delta Force Command was kept in the dark." "What was the mission?" Rachel asked. "Officially, to secure a suspected biological weapons facility in Samara before the Iraqi Republican Guard could destroy evidence of its existence." Reed's expression darkened. "The reality was more complicated," Eddie interrupted. "Show her the photo first. She deserves to see it." Reed reached into her bag and withdrew a weathered photograph in a protective sleeve. She slid it across the table to Rachel. The image showed 7 soldiers in desert camouflage standing before a helicopter in what was clearly the Iraqi desert. Rachel immediately recognized her father in the center, younger than in the few photos she had of him, but unmistakably Jonathan Morgan. Frank Sullivan stood to his right. On his left was a younger Eleanor Reed, her medical insignia visible on her uniform. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she touched the photograph. The man at the center, her father, wasn't the formal military portrait she'd grown up with. Here he was, vital alive, with a slight smile that reached his eyes. She'd inherited those eyes, people had always told her. For the first time, she could truly see the resemblance. "Task Force Quicksilver," Reed said quietly. "Your father commanded the mission. Frank Sullivan was his second. Michael Torres was our communications specialist. David Reynolds handled explosives. Sarah Blackwood was intelligence. James Harper was our pilot." She pointed to herself in the photo. "I was the medical officer and biological weapons specialist." Rachel studied the image, emotions warring within her. This was physical evidence of her father's existence beyond the sanitized official accounts she had grown up with. "What was the mission's true purpose?" she asked, looking up from the photo. Reed exchanged glances with Eddie before answering. "To recover evidence that the United States had provided biological weapons to Iraq during the 1980s. Weapons that weren't supposed to exist." The revelation hit Rachel like a physical blow. "American biological weapons in Iraq. Project Helios," Reed confirmed. "Developed at Fort Detrick in the early 1980s, but officially abandoned due to treaty violations. Except it wasn't abandoned. It was privatized through shell companies and provided to Iraq for use against Iran. With full deniability for the U.S. government," Eddie added bitterly. "By 1991 with Iraq, now the enemy those weapons had to be recovered before they could be found by UN inspectors or worse, used against coalition forces," Reed continued. "Your father's team was sent to secure the facility, destroy any weapons found, and retrieve all documentation that could link them back to the United States." Rachel processed this information, years of military experience helping her understand the strategic implications. "What went wrong?" "Everything," Reed said, her voice hollow with old pain. "We arrived at the facility to find it already partially destroyed. Republican Guard units were withdrawing, but they'd set delayed charges to complete the destruction. Your father ordered us to secure whatever documentation remained while he and Sullivan went deeper into the facility." Reed took a long breath before continuing. "They found surviving samples of Helios and evidence that it had been tested on political prisoners. But they also found something worse, documentation showing that Helios hadn't been provided to Iraq by rogue elements or contractors. It had been an authorized black operation with signatures from officials at the highest levels of government. Names that are still in positions of power today," Eddie interjected. names that became even more powerful in the decades since. We secured what we could before the charges detonated, Reed continued. The explosion separated us. Your father and Sullivan were deeper in the facility with the most damning evidence. The rest of us made it to the extraction point, but they never arrived. Rachel's training kept her emotions in check, but her voice tightened. And then, we were debriefed separately, told that Morgan and Sullivan had been killed in the explosion, ordered never to speak of the mission or what we'd found. Each of us was reassigned to different units, different parts of the world. Reed's eyes reflected decades-old trauma. But before we separated, your father had given each of us a piece of insurance, fragments of a dog tag with Quicksilver stamped on them. If anything happened to any of us, the others would know. Rachel placed the fragment Sullivan had given her on the table. Like this one. Reed nodded. Exactly like that one. 7 fragments, 7 team members. Your father's idea, if we were ever silenced, the fragments would still tell the story. But my father supposedly died in a helicopter crash the next day, Rachel said. Not in the explosion at the facility. That's what we were told, Reed agreed. But Sullivan never believed it. He spent years searching for the truth. And now, someone's killing the team members, Rachel concluded. Why now, after all these years? Eddie stood and turned on a small television in the corner, tuning it to a news channel. The screen showed a distinguished man with silver hair addressing a crowd. That's why, he said grimly. Senator William Blackwood announcing his candidacy for president yesterday. Former CIA served in Iraq, now the front-runner for his party's nomination. Sarah Blackwood's father, Reed added, and one of the names on the documents your father found in Samara. Rachel stared at the screen, the pieces falling into place. They're cleaning house, eliminating anyone who could connect him to Project Helios before the campaign gains momentum. 5 team members already dead, Reed confirmed. Sullivan critically injured. I'm being watched. And now you've appeared connecting with both of us within hours. What about my father? Rachel asked, returning to the question that had started this journey. Sullivan said he might still be alive. Reed hesitated. Frank always believed Jonathan survived. There was never a body, never confirmation. Just an official report of a helicopter crash that supposedly killed him. Frank thought he was being held somewhere, Eddie added. Someone that valuable, with that kind of damning evidence, they wouldn't just kill him. They'd want to know who else had information, what fail-safes he'd put in place. For 32 years, Rachel questioned, skepticism evident. Wouldn't be the first time, Eddie replied darkly. Men have disappeared into black sites for less. Especially men with knowledge that could topple governments. Rachel stood military training asserting itself as she processed tactical implications. We need to secure Sullivan. If they haven't already silenced him, they will soon. Too risky, Reed countered. The hospital is compromised. We need to focus on finding the evidence your father secured. That's what they're afraid of. Not witnesses, but proof. Where would it be? Rachel asked. Reed and Eddie exchanged glances again. There's one person who might know, Reed said finally. The last member of Quicksilver still unaccounted for. James Harper, Rachel said, remembering the name from Reed's description of the team. The pilot. Eddie nodded. Last anyone heard, he was working as a caretaker at Arlington National Cemetery. Fitting job for a man who flew so many of his friends home in body bags. Arlington, Rachel repeated, determination settling over her features. Then that's where we go next. She stared again at the photograph of Task Force Quicksilver, at the face of the father she'd never known. All her life she'd felt the phantom weight of his absence, had followed his footsteps into uniform, searching for some connection to the ghost he'd become. Now that ghost might actually be flesh and blood, a prisoner in some black site waiting 32 years for rescue. Rachel touched her father's watch, its stopped hands frozen at the moment of his reported death. If there was even a chance he was alive, she would find him. Outside Thompson's Service and Repair, a nondescript sedan parked half a block away. Inside, a man spoke quietly into a secure phone. "Confirmed. Target is with Reed and Thompson. Appears they're planning to move." The voice that responded was coldly efficient. "Stay with them. Asset team is being deployed to Arlington. If they lead us to Harper, we can eliminate all remaining loose ends simultaneously." The watcher acknowledged the order and settled in to maintain surveillance, unaware that Eddie Thompson's security extended well beyond the visible cameras. Inside, a light on his radio console had already alerted him to the electronic signature of a surveillance transmitter within range of his building. The shadow war that had begun in the Iraqi desert 32 years ago was entering its final phase, with Rachel Morgan now at its center. The early morning mist clung to the abandoned airstrip 40 miles outside Boston, wrapping the small Cessna in ghostly tendrils. Eddie Thompson ran his weathered hand along the aircraft's fuselage with the familiarity of an old friend. "She's not much to look at," he admitted, "but she'll get you to Virginia without going through commercial channels." Rachel Morgan studied the plane with a professional eye. The Cessna 172 was well maintained despite its age, its faded paint belying the pristine engine Eddie had just shown her. "You fly this regularly?" "Often enough," Eddie replied. "Some skills you don't forget." He tapped his temple. 40,000 hours in everything from Hueys in Nam to Black Hawks in Desert Storm before I retired. This little bird is just for keeping the rust off." Eleanor Reed emerged from Eddie's office carrying 3 small backpacks. "Basic supplies?" she explained, handing one to Rachel. "Cash clean clothes, first aid. No electronics that can be tracked." Rachel nodded, appreciating the precaution. The events of the past 24 hours had confirmed that whoever was hunting the Quicksilver team had resources that extended far beyond normal channels. Commercial flights, credit cards, phones, all would leave digital footprints that could be traced. "What about Sullivan?" she asked. Reed's expression tightened. "My contact at the hospital texted an hour ago. Frank's gone. Dead." Rachel felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "No, transferred. Men with federal credentials moved him to an undisclosed medical facility for national security reasons. The hospital administrator didn't question it." Reed's tone made clear what she thought of that decision. Eddie checked his watch. "We need to move. Dawn's coming, and I'd prefer to be airborne before full light." Rachel hesitated, looking back toward Eddie's truck. "You're staying behind." "Someone's got to run interference," the old veteran replied with a wry smile. "I've got a network of friends keeping an eye on our surveillance friend down the street. When you're airborne, we'll give him a nice scenic tour of the Massachusetts coastline." Rachel extended her hand. "Thank you." Eddie clasped it firmly. "You find Harper. Find out what happened to your father. The rest of us old warriors have been carrying this burden too long." 20 minutes later, the Cessna climbed steadily through thinning clouds, Boston's sprawl giving way to the patchwork of forests and fields below. Reed sat beside Rachel in the cockpit, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "You know how to fly?" Reed asked, noticing Rachel's familiarity with the controls. "Basic training," Rachel replied. "Part of Ranger qualification. Nothing like Eddie's experience." Reed nodded, satisfied. "Good. Always have a backup plan." They flew in silence for several minutes before Rachel voiced the question that had been gnawing at her since their conversation at Eddie's. "Why didn't any of you ever tell me, all these years? If my father might be alive. Reed's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. We tried. At first. What does that mean? After the mission, when they told us Jonathan and Frank had died, we didn't question it immediately. Combat operations, things go wrong. Reed's voice was steady, clinical. But then Frank showed up alive 3 months later. Military hospital in Germany. Severe injuries, no memory of how he got out of Iraq. That's when we started asking questions. And people started dying. Reed turned to face Rachel. Robert Jenkins, Delta Force communication specialist, who helped plan Quicksilver. Car accident, July 1991. Maria Vasquez, intelligence officer, who processed our initial reports. Suicide, supposedly, October 1991. Her voice hardened. By the time Frank was released from the hospital, 3 people connected to Quicksilver were dead. The message was clear. Rachel absorbed this, the tactical implications obvious. So you went underground. Separated. Frank refused to accept Jonathan was dead. Started digging. The rest of us, we did what we could. Kept our heads down, established fail-safes, stayed loosely connected. Reed sighed. Frank tried to contact your mother once in 1995. 2 days later, her car was forced off the road, a warning accident that broke her arm. She got the message. The revelation hit Rachel like physical blow. My mother knew all this time, knew enough to be terrified, to protect you and your brother by maintaining the official story. Reed's expression softened slightly. Don't judge her harshly. She did what she had to do. Rachel turned away, processing this new information against decades of memories. Her mother's occasional unexplained tears. Her insistence that Rachel's father was a hero who died serving his country. Technically true, but monumentally incomplete. The panic in her eyes when Rachel had announced her intention to join the military. My brother died in Afghanistan in 2010, Rachel said finally. IED strike on his convoy. Was that connected? Reed hesitated, her expression troubled. We thought it was just war. Bad luck like thousands of others. But now, with everything that's happening, she trailed off. You think his death wasn't an accident? Rachel said flatly. It wasn't a question. The timing was suspicious. He was assigned to a classified intelligence unit. If he started accessing records about your father... Rachel's knuckles whitened on the controls. Her brother's death, the tragedy that had defined her family's later years, might have been another piece in this decades-long conspiracy, another casualty of Quicksilver. The realization ignited something cold and hard within her, transforming personal loss into tactical resolve. We're approaching Virginia airspace, Reed noted after nearly 3 hours. Eddie's friend should be waiting at the private airfield near Manassas. Rachel focused on the immediate mission, compartmentalizing her personal revelations. What do we know about Harper beyond his job at Arlington? James Harper, former Night Stalker pilot. After Quicksilver, he was reassigned to the 160th SOAR flew missions in Somalia, later Afghanistan. Retired in 2005 as a chief warrant officer. Reed recited the facts with military precision. Lost his wife to cancer in 2011. No children. Started working at Arlington in 2013. Keeps to himself. How did he avoid the recent purge? Rachel asked. Frank thinks Harper made a deal. Agreed to stay silent in exchange for being left alone. Reed's tone suggested she didn't entirely approve. But if anyone knows where your father might have hidden evidence, it's Harper. He was the extraction pilot responsible for getting everyone out, including any material they recovered. The airfield appeared ahead, a modest facility with a single runway and a cluster of hangars. Rachel brought the Cessna down in a textbook landing, taxiing toward a hangar where a solitary figure waited beside a dusty pickup truck. "That's our contact," Rachel asked. Reed nodded. "Sam Winters, retired Marine Force Recon, friend of Eddie's from their Vietnam days." Winters approached as they disembarked, a tall, lean man in his 70s whose ramrod posture and watchful eyes spoke of military discipline never abandoned. "Dr. Reed," he greeted with a nod. "Been a while." "Too long, Sam," Reed replied. "This is Rachel Morgan." Winters assessed Rachel with a single glance. "Jonathan's girl. Eddie said you'd be coming." He gestured toward his truck. "We should move. This place will be seeing commercial traffic soon." As they drove away from the airfield, Rachel noted that Winters took a circuitous route, frequently checking his mirrors. Standard counter-surveillance techniques. "Problem?" she asked. "Probably not," Winters replied. "But old habits die hard. Arlington's only 30 miles from Langley. Lot of spooks in this part of Virginia." "Sam's been keeping tabs on Harper for years," Reed explained. "As a precaution. Man visits his wife's grave every Sunday like clockwork," Winters added. "Works the grounds crew at Arlington during the week. Lives in a small apartment in Alexandria. Keeps to himself, but seems stable enough." "Today's Wednesday," Rachel noted. "So he'll be working." Winters nodded. "Ground crew starts at 0600. He'll be there now." "How do we approach him?" Rachel asked. "If he made a deal to stay silent, he won't be eager to talk." "That's where these come in," Reed said, removing a small package from her bag. Inside were 3 more metal fragments identical to the one Sullivan had given Rachel, each bearing the same inscription, Quicksilver, Samara, 22791. Insurance policies, Rachel realized. Frank recovered these from Torres Reynolds and Blackwood after their deaths. Reed confirmed. "The 7 fragments together form a complete dog tag, your father's fail-safe. Harper will recognize what they mean." Winters pulled into a roadside diner about 10 miles from Arlington. "We'll wait here until noon. Cemetery's too busy in the morning." Harper takes his lunch break at the maintenance shed on the eastern perimeter away from visitors. Less eyes, less questions. Rachel checked her watch. Nearly 4 hours to wait. "Tell me more about my father," she said to Reed. "Not the mission, the man." For the first time, Reed's professional demeanor softened, a distant look entering her eyes. "Jonathan was exceptional, not just as an officer, but as a human being. He commanded respect without demanding it, cared about his people beyond their operational value." She smiled faintly. "He carried pictures of you and your brother everywhere, talked about you constantly, how smart you were, how brave. He was going to teach you to fish when he got home." Rachel absorbed these details hungrily, building a more complete picture of the man who had been reduced to a formal portrait and a folded flag. Did he know about Project Helios before the mission? Reed shook her head. "None of us did. We were told it was a standard WMD containment operation. The kind Delta had run before, securing sensitive materials, before they could fall into the wrong hands or be destroyed as evidence." Her expression darkened. "Finding out they were American weapons, that our own government had provided them, it changed everything." "Especially for your father," Winters interjected. "Jonathan Morgan was old-school patriot, West Point honor graduate, believed in the system in the chain of command. Discovering that betrayal hit him hard. But not hard enough to abandon his duty," Reed added. "He was determined to bring the evidence back to hold the responsible parties accountable, regardless of their rank or position." Rachel understood. This wasn't just about a covert operation gone wrong or a man lost in combat. This was about fundamental principles of duty, honor, and truth, the very values that had shaped her own military career. The hours passed with Reed and Winters sharing stories of Jonathan Morgan, filling in the outlines of the father Rachel had never truly known. By the time they approached Arlington National Cemetery, she felt both closer to him and more determined than ever to discover his fate. 200 miles away in Washington, D.C., Senator William Blackwood stood at the window of his private office, gazing out at the Capitol dome gleaming in the midday sun. At 68, his distinguished silver hair and patrician features had become familiar to millions of Americans through decades of public service, first as a CIA officer, then as a congressman, and now as a senior senator poised for a presidential run. Few of those Americans would recognize the cold calculation in his eyes as he turned from the window to the man waiting patiently in a leather chair. "Status report, Mr. Kelso," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the refined accent of old Virginia money and an Ivy League education. Alexander Kelso, tall, athletic, with prematurely gray hair and the watchful stillness of a predator, straightened imperceptibly. At 45, he had spent 2 decades in service to Blackwood, first as his security detail, then as his private problem solver. His official title was Special Security Consultant, but those in certain circles knew him as Blackwood's cleaner. Sullivan remains sedated at the facility senator. Preliminary examination of his personal effects yielded nothing related to quicksilver. "We're monitoring his known associates, but most are deceased." Kelso's clinical report continued. "However, there's been an unexpected development. Jonathan Morgan's daughter has become involved." Blackwood's expression sharpened. "The ranger I thought she was deployed in Syria. Recently returned. She was present during Sullivan's shooting at Luigi's restaurant in Boston. She's since connected with Eleanor Reed, and they've gone off-grid. We're tracking their movements toward Arlington." "Toward Harper," Blackwood concluded, a note of irritation entering his voice. "I thought you assured me he was contained." "He was," Kelso replied evenly. "Regular surveillance, routine monitoring of communications. He's maintained his end of the arrangement for years, silence in exchange for safety. And yet Morgan's daughter is heading straight for him." Blackwood moved to his desk, pressing a button that activated a series of electronic countermeasures against surveillance. The room's subtle background hum changed pitch as white noise generators and signal jammers engaged. "This is becoming unnecessarily complicated, Alex. After 32 years of careful management, we are now facing multiple security breaches weeks before my campaign announcement." "The timing isn't coincidental," Kelso observed. "Sullivan's always been the most persistent. He must have made contact with Morgan's daughter deliberately, knowing the campaign would create vulnerability." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, fingers forming a contemplative steeple. "What do they know?" "Difficult to determine without direct interrogation. Sullivan's been collecting fragments of the identification tag for years. Recovered them from Torres Reynolds and Blackwood after their neutralization. If they've assembled all the pieces, then they have the coordinates," Blackwood finished grimly, "to evidence that should have been destroyed 3 decades ago." "Yes, sir." Blackwood was silent for a moment, decades of political calculation evident in his measured response. "Harper is the weak link. He knows where Morgan hid the evidence. Extract him immediately." "And the others?" Kelso asked. "Morgan's daughter complicates matters. She's active military decorated. Her disappearance would trigger official investigation." Blackwood's tone hardened. "But we can't allow them to recover whatever Jonathan Morgan hid. Too much is at stake." "Understood. I have a team positioning near Arlington now. Harper will be in custody within hours." "And the evidence? Once we have Harper, we'll know exactly where to look. The material will be secured and destroyed before anyone else can access it." Blackwood nodded, satisfied with the plan, but still troubled by the timing. What about Morgan himself? After all these years, is containment still secure? Sighted Blackfish reports no change in status, Kelso assured him. He remains in controlled isolation. No unauthorized access, no security anomalies. Good. Blackwood stood signaling the end of the meeting. I want updates every 3 hours. This situation needs to be resolved completely before my announcement next week. Yes, Senator? Kelso rose smoothly. One additional matter. Surveillance picked up chatter from Eddie Thompson's location after Reed and Morgan departed. He appears to be activating old networks veterans with specific skill sets. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Threat assessment. Moderate to high. These aren't ordinary civilians. Former Special Operations Intelligence. Men with experience and loyalty to their own code. Monitor, but don't engage yet, Blackwood decided. Focus on securing Harper and the evidence. Without those, their networks are just old men with suspicions, not threats. Kelso nodded and departed silently, leaving Blackwood alone with thoughts of a presidential campaign built atop 3 decades of carefully managed secrets. He had come too far to allow ancient history to derail his ambitions now. Project Helios had been a regrettable necessity in a complicated geopolitical landscape, the kind of hard decision that separated true leaders from idealistic fools. Jonathan Morgan had been one such fool unable to understand the necessary compromises of national security. His daughter appeared to share that unfortunate trait. Blackwood returned to the window, gazing again at the Capitol dome. Soon it would be the White House visible from his office windows. Nothing would be allowed to prevent that, especially not the ghosts of Desert Storm. Arlington National Cemetery stretched before them, row upon row of white headstones standing in perfect formation across the gently rolling hills, America's most sacred ground. Rachel had visited many times both for her brother's funeral and to pay respects at her father's memorial stone. Now she viewed the familiar landscape with new eyes, wondering if the man commemorated here might actually be alive. Winters drove them to a service entrance near the maintenance area. Harper should be taking his lunch break in about 15 minutes, he said, checking his watch. The maintenance shed is just beyond those trees. I should go alone, Rachel decided. Less threatening. If he spooks, one person is easier to explain than 3. Reed hesitated, then nodded. Take these, she said, handing Rachel the metal fragments. They're your best chance of getting him to talk. Be careful, Winters added, his weathered face showing genuine concern. I'll maintain overwatch from that rise. He pointed to a small hill with a clear view of the maintenance area. If anything seems off, I'll signal with this. He handed her a small radio receiver disguised as a hearing aid. 1 buzz means proceed with caution. 2 means abort immediately. Rachel was surprised by the sophistication of their equipment. You came prepared. Eddie's not the only one who maintained connections, Winters replied with a grim smile. Some of us old Marines never really retired, just changed battlefields. Rachel pocketed the fragments and made her way through the cemetery on foot, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged there. She wore civilian clothes purchased during their brief stop at a roadside store, nothing that would draw attention among the visitors paying their respects. The maintenance area was separated from the main grounds by a small copse of trees, providing privacy for the groundskeepers during their breaks. As Rachel approached, she spotted a solitary figure sitting on a bench outside a modest shed, unwrapping a sandwich. James Harper looked older than his years, mid-60s, but with the weathered appearance of a man who had seen too much. His hands, once accustomed to the complex controls of military helicopters, now showed the calluses of manual labor. He ate methodically, his gaze distant, lost in thoughts Rachel could only imagine. She approached openly, making no attempt to conceal her presence. Harper noticed her immediately, his posture shifting subtly, the unconscious response of a veteran sensing potential threat. "Chief Warrant Officer Harper?" Rachel asked, stopping at a respectful distance. Harper's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with assessment. "Haven't been called that in a long time. Who's asking?" "My name is Rachel Morgan. Jonathan Morgan was my father." Harper's sandwich paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, something like fear flickered across his features before being replaced by careful blankness. "Morgan, good man, died in Desert Storm, if I recall." "Did he?" Rachel asked quietly. Harper set his sandwich down, his movements deliberately calm. "Look, miss, I don't know what you're after, but I'm just a groundskeeper. I knew a lot of soldiers back in the day." Rachel reached into her pocket and withdrew the 4 metal fragments, placing them on the bench beside Harper. "Quicksilver," she said simply. "Samara, February 27, 1991. Harper stared at the fragments, all pretense of indifference vanishing. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, voice barely above a whisper. "Sullivan gave me one before he was shot. Reed had the others recovered from Torres Reynolds and Blackwood after their deaths." Rachel held his gaze steadily. "They're being hunted. Sullivan's missing. Reed's next on their list. You might be too." Harper's eyes darted to the surrounding area, suddenly alert for surveillance. "Not here," he said tersely. "Too exposed." "Where then?" "Section 60. 20 minutes. Look like you're visiting a grave." Harper gathered the metal fragments with hands that trembled slightly. "If anyone's watching, I don't want you connected to me yet." Rachel nodded and walked away without looking back, meandering through the cemetery as if searching for a particular headstone. As she moved, the hearing aid in her ear buzzed once. Winter's signal to proceed with caution. Somewhere on the perimeter, something had caught his attention. She continued her circuitous route through Arlington's solemn grounds, heightening her situational awareness while maintaining her cover as a casual visitor. Twice, she spotted men in dark suits moving purposefully through the cemetery. Not mourners or tourists, but individuals with the alert posture and scanning patterns of security personnel. Section 60 held the graves of those killed in America's most recent conflicts: Iraq-Afghanistan, the War on Terror. Rachel had visited her brother's grave here many times. Today she paused before his headstone, genuine emotion mixing with tactical necessity, as she maintained her cover as a grieving sister. "Hey, Mike," she said softly, kneeling to trace the engraved letters of his name. "Things have gotten complicated. I might have been wrong about Dad. All these years." She trailed off, the weight of possibility momentarily overwhelming her professional detachment. "Your brother was a good soldier." Harper's voice came from behind her. He stood a respectful distance away, a bouquet of flowers in hand, the perfect cover for a groundskeeper pausing to speak with a visitor. "I looked him up when I heard a Morgan had been killed in Afghanistan. Wondered if he was related." Rachel stood brushing grass from her knees. "You knew he wasn't my father." "I suspected." Harper laid the flowers at a neighboring grave, maintaining their cover. "Walk with me. Act like I'm helping you find another section." They moved slowly through the cemetery, 2 figures unremarkable among the daily visitors. Harper led them toward a maintenance access road, partly shielded by trees. "Sullivan's alive?" he asked quietly. "Last I knew. Shot at Luigi's restaurant in Boston, then transferred from the hospital by men claiming federal authority." Rachel watched Harper's reaction carefully. "Reed thinks it's connected to Senator Blackwood's presidential campaign, cleaning house before any Quicksilver connections can surface." Harper's jaw tightened. "Sarah Blackwood was a good woman. Nothing like her father." "You've been watching them die one by one," Rachel observed neither accusation nor question in her tone. Not just watching, Harper corrected grimly. Documenting, collecting proof. I made a deal, yes, but not the one Reed thinks. As they approached a small equipment shed near the access road, the hearing aid in Rachel's ear buzzed twice, the emergency abort signal. She immediately tensed, scanning for threats while maintaining her casual demeanor. "We need to move," she murmured to Harper. "Winters just signaled danger." Harper's expression hardened as he too scanned their surroundings. "Too late," he said quietly, nodding toward a black SUV that had appeared on the access road ahead. "That's not cemetery security." Rachel quickly assessed their options. The SUV was blocking the path ahead. Behind them, two men in suits had appeared at the edge of Section 60, moving purposefully in their direction. Their window for clean escape was rapidly closing. "The shed," Harper decided. "Now." They altered course, moving at an unhurried pace that belied their growing alarm. Harper unlocked the equipment shed, and they slipped inside, securing the door behind them. The interior was cramped, but meticulously organized tools hanging in precise order on the walls. 2 minutes, maybe less, Rachel estimated, calculating the response time of the approaching men. "What's our exit?" Harper moved to a corner, shifting a metal cabinet to reveal a small trapdoor in the floor. "Maintenance tunnel. Runs to the main building. I mapped every escape route in this place my first week working here." "Smart man," Rachel commented, appreciating the tactical foresight. "Paranoid man," Harper corrected, lifting the trapdoor to reveal a narrow passage below. 32 years of looking over my shoulder teaches habits." Before they could descend, a burst of static came from the radio at Harper's belt, the standard issue for groundskeepers. "Harper, this is Martinez at the West Gate. You got visitors asking for you. Suits. Say it's urgent." Harper exchanged glances with Rachel before responding. "Tell them I'm on lunch. Be there in 15. They're pretty insistent, man. Say it's federal business." 15 minutes, Martinez. I'm in the middle of something." He clipped the radio back to his belt and quickly moved to a locked cabinet behind his workbench. "We've got less time than I thought." From the cabinet, he withdrew a weathered leather portfolio and a small pouch. "My insurance policy," he explained, handing both to Rachel. "Documentation of every suspicious death connected to Quicksilver. And these, he emptied the pouch, revealing 3 final fragments of the dog tag, completing the set of 7, are what they're really after." "And what they lead to," Rachel added. "The evidence your father secured from Samara." Harper nodded. "Hidden where no one would think to look, in a place so public and secure that covert retrieval would be nearly impossible." Rachel assembled the fragments, forming a complete military identification tag with her father's information. Unlike standard dog tags, the back contained a series of small marks, deliberate engravings that formed a pattern when properly aligned. Not geographic coordinates, she realized, studying the markings. These are historical references, Civil War regimental numbers. She looked up at Harper. "The museum at Arlington House. The Civil War exhibit." Harper's eyes widened with newfound respect. "You're quick. Took Sullivan years to figure that out." He nodded toward the trapdoor. "The tunnel leads to the administrative section. From there you can access the public areas of Arlington House, including the museum." "What about you? I'll create a diversion, buy you time." His expression brooked no argument. "I've been preparing for this day for 32 years, Major. I know my role." A sudden noise outside, boots on gravel, signaled their time had run out. Harper quickly gave Rachel final instructions on navigating the tunnel system, then pressed a small key into her palm. "Display case 19 South Wall, behind the regimental flag of the 54th Massachusetts." This opens the hidden compartment your father designed into the renovation plans in 1991. His eyes held a fierce intensity. Find it. Expose them. Finish what your father started. Rachel nodded, understanding the weight of the mission he was entrusting to her. What about Reed and Winters? They'll be compromised too. Trust no one until you've secured the evidence. Harper checked his watch. Now go. I'll handle our visitors. Rachel descended into the tunnel, pulling the trapdoor closed above her. Through the narrow gap before it shut completely, she saw Harper composing himself, assuming the role of an ordinary groundskeeper about to face unexpected questioning. The tunnel was low and narrow, requiring her to move in a crouched position. Decades-old electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, providing minimal emergency lighting. The air was stale but breathable, thick with the musty scent of undisturbed earth. As she moved through the darkness, Rachel heard the muffled sound of the shed door opening above, followed by the indistinct cadence of authoritative voices. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Not a request, but a demand. Harper's response was too faint to decipher, but something in his voice had changed, a note of defiance replacing the cautious restraint he'd shown earlier. Rachel paused, instinct telling her to listen to gather intelligence before proceeding. A sudden, sharp sound echoed through the tunnel, the unmistakable report of a silenced pistol. Then another. The voices fell silent. Rachel froze, the tactical reality instantly clear. Harper had known he wouldn't be leaving that shed alive. His diversion hadn't been a clever ruse. It had been a sacrifice play, buying her time with his life. Grief and rage mingled with cold professional focus as Rachel continued through the tunnel. Harper's death confirmed the stakes. These weren't government agents following protocol, but cleaners eliminating loose ends. The same operatives who had systematically eliminated the Quicksilver team were now closing the net around the final pieces. The tunnel branched twice, Rachel following Harper's directions at each junction. After approximately 300 meters, she reached a metal ladder leading to another trapdoor. According to Harper's instructions, this would open into a maintenance closet in the administrative wing of Arlington House. Before ascending, Rachel paused to check the contents of Harper's portfolio. Inside were meticulously organized files, newspaper clippings of obituaries, handwritten notes, photographs, and timeline analyses. Harper had documented every death connected to Quicksilver, building a compelling case for systematic elimination rather than coincidence. More disturbing were several surveillance photographs of a remote facility identified only as Blackfish, a compound of nondescript buildings surrounded by desert with no identifying features or location markers. A single notation in Harper's precise handwriting read, "Possible Containment Site, JM." The implication sent a chill through Rachel. Harper had believed her father might be held at this facility, not just for interrogation, but for 3 decades of imprisonment. The possibility seemed almost too horrific to contemplate, yet consistent with the extreme measures taken to eliminate everyone connected to Quicksilver. Rachel secured the portfolio in her pack and prepared to ascend. Harper's sacrifice demanded successful completion of the mission. Secure the evidence, expose the conspiracy, and, if possible, determine her father's true fate. She climbed the ladder, carefully listening for movement above before gently testing the trap door. It opened into a small janitor's closet, dark and undisturbed. Rachel emerged, closed the trapdoor, and quickly oriented herself based on Harper's directions. The administrative wing connected to the public areas of Arlington House through a security door requiring keycard access. Rather than risk electronic detection, Rachel opted for an alternate route Harper had described, through a staff break room that opened onto a public corridor. Moving with practiced stealth, She navigated the back areas of the historic building, adopting the purposeful stride of someone who belonged there whenever she encountered staff. Her civilian clothes and confident demeanor prevented immediate questioning, though she knew her window of anonymity was rapidly closing. Once in the public areas, Rachel blended with the tourists visiting the historic site. The museum section occupied the east wing of Arlington House, its exhibits chronicling American military history with particular emphasis on the Civil War period. Rachel entered casually scanning for surveillance cameras and security personnel. 2 guards stood at the main entrance, but the interior was monitored primarily by cameras, standard museum security rather than enhanced protection. Nothing suggested the staff was aware of the hidden treasure concealed within one of their displays. The Civil War exhibit occupied a large gallery, its walls lined with glass cases containing uniforms, weapons, maps, and flags from both Union and Confederate forces. Rachel moved methodically through the space, maintaining the appearance of an interested visitor while locating her target, display case 19, on the south wall. The case contained the regimental flags of several famous Union units, including the 54th Massachusetts, the first African-American regiment formed in the North immortalized for their assault on Fort Wagner. Behind that historic flag, if Harper's information was correct, lay evidence that could expose a conspiracy spanning decades. Rachel positioned herself before the display, blocking the camera's view with her body as she examined the case for access points. A small, almost invisible keyhole was set into the wooden frame, matching the key Harper had given her. Before she could act, a familiar voice spoke from directly behind her. "Fascinating exhibit, isn't it, Major Morgan?" Rachel turned slowly, maintaining her composure despite the surge of adrenaline. A tall man with prematurely gray hair stood 2 paces away, dressed in an impeccable suit that couldn't quite disguise his military bearing. His pleasant expression did nothing to mask the predatory assessment in his eyes. "The 54th Massachusetts," he continued conversationally. 600 men charging into artillery fire for a country that didn't even recognize them as full citizens. Extraordinary courage. He extended his hand. Alexander Kelso, Senator Blackwood's security consultant. Rachel didn't take the offered hand. Interesting job title for an assassin. Kelso's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "I prefer problem solver. And right now, you're becoming quite a significant problem." He glanced meaningfully around the museum gallery, where Rachel now noticed several men in suits strategically positioned near exits. "We should continue this conversation elsewhere, less public." "Where Harper went?" Rachel asked flatly. A flicker of something, not quite regret, crossed Kelso's features. "Chief Warrant Officer Harper made an unfortunate choice. I'm offering you a different option." "What option is that?" "Cooperation." Kelso stepped closer, voice dropping to ensure privacy. "You're a decorated officer with a promising career. None of this is your battle. You've been drawn into a conflict that began before you were born. Walk away now, and you can return to your life, your career, your future." "And if I don't?" Kelso's expression turned regretful. "Then you'll disappear. Not dead. The investigation into a missing ranger would be too problematic. But there are facilities where problematic individuals can be contained indefinitely. Just ask your father." The casual confirmation sent a jolt through Rachel, though she kept her expression neutral. "So he is alive." In a manner of speaking. Kelso checked his watch. "You have 30 seconds to decide, Major. Cooperation or containment." Rachel assessed her tactical situation with cold precision. 5 hostiles visible in the gallery. Unknown number outside. No immediate backup, as Reed and Winters were likely compromised. Limited weapons options in a public space filled with civilians. But she had one advantage Kelso couldn't know. She had already identified the evidence location. If she could create even a momentary distraction, "I'd like to speak with Senator Blackwood directly," she said, appearing to consider Kelso's offer, "before making any decisions." Kelso studied her, weighing the request. "That can be arranged. After we secure the evidence you came for." He gestured toward the display case. "The key Harper gave you. Hand it over and we'll proceed civilly." Rachel feigned surprise, then resignation. She reached slowly into her pocket, withdrawing not the key, but her father's Timex watch. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is all Harper gave me." As Kelso's attention focused on the watch, Rachel made her move. In one fluid motion, she hurled the watch at the nearest fire alarm pull station. The impact triggered the alarm, its strident blare instantly filling the gallery. Chaos erupted as visitors moved toward exits. Museum staff attempted to establish order, and Kelso's men momentarily lost sight of their target in the surging crowd. Rachel used the confusion to swift advantage, inserting Harper's key into the display case and turning it with practiced efficiency. A small panel at the base of the frame slid open, revealing a hidden compartment containing a weatherproof metal case no larger than a paperback book. Rachel seized it and merged with the flow of evacuating visitors, using their bodies as cover. Kelso recovered quickly, barking orders to his team as he pursued Rachel through the crowded gallery. "Seal all exits. Target has the package." Rachel navigated through the panicked crowd, calculating escape vectors as she moved. The main exits would be covered. Secondary exits likely as well. She needed an unexpected route, something not on the security diagrams. As she rounded a corner into a less crowded corridor, Rachel spotted a service elevator used for transporting artifacts between floors. An elderly custodian was holding it open as museum staff hurriedly moved valuable items from the exhibition area. Rachel slipped into the elevator just as the doors began to close, positioning herself behind a large display cart being evacuated from the gallery. The custodian gave her a curious glance, but asked no questions as they descended to the basement level. When the doors opened, Rachel moved with purpose toward what building layouts typically designated as mechanical rooms. Behind her, she heard the elevator being recalled to upper floors, Kelso's team systematically searching the building. The basement corridor led to a series of storage rooms and workshops where conservation work was performed on museum artifacts. Rachel navigated the labyrinth of spaces, seeking any exit point that would bypass the security cordon undoubtedly established above. A loading dock at the rear of the building offered potential, but as she approached, Rachel spotted two of Kelso's men stationed at the bay doors. Her window of escape was narrowing by the second. Then, she remembered Harper's tunnel system. If the maintenance tunnels connected different parts of Arlington House, they might extend to other buildings on the grounds as well. Rachel began searching for access points, finally locating a utility room with a floor grate similar to the one in Harper's shed. The grate opened to reveal another maintenance tunnel, older and narrower than the one she'd used earlier, but navigable. Rachel descended, securing the grate above her before activating the small flashlight from her pack. The tunnel stretched into darkness, its earthen walls reinforced with ancient timbers. According to the historical information in the museum, Arlington House had been built in the early 1800s, its infrastructure modified numerous times over 2 centuries. This particular passage might date to the Civil War era when the mansion had been seized by Union forces. Rachel moved quickly through the confined space, the metal case secured in her pack alongside Harper's documentation. Behind her, muffled sounds of the ongoing search filtered through the earth. Voices, doors opening and closing, radios crackling with coordination efforts. After nearly 20 minutes of navigation, including 2 junctions where she was forced to guess the correct path, Rachel emerged through another access point into what appeared to be a groundskeeper's storage facility some distance from the main house. Through a small window, she could see she was near the western perimeter of the Arlington grounds. Beyond lay the city with its metro stations, crowded streets, and countless opportunities to disappear. But first, she needed to know what her father had considered worth dying for, what had been hidden for 32 years in a secret compartment behind a museum display. Rachel secured the storage room door and opened the weatherproof case. Inside lay a military-grade data storage device, obsolete by current standards but cutting-edge for 1991, and a handwritten letter in a sealed plastic envelope. The letter bore a simple address, "To my children if I don't return." With trembling fingers that belied her tactical composure, Rachel opened the envelope and unfolded the pages within. The handwriting was precise, methodical. The same careful script she'd seen in the few personal effects her mother had preserved. "Rachel and Michael," it began. "If you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong, and the men I trusted to protect our country have betrayed that trust. What I've discovered in Samara cannot be buried or denied. The evidence in this data device proves that Project Helios was not a rogue operation, but an authorized program with signatures from the highest levels of government." As Rachel read her father's final message, written hours before his disappearance, the full scope of the Quicksilver conspiracy unfolded before her. Project Helios had not merely been unauthorized biological weapons provided to Iraq, but part of a systematic program to test experimental compounds on foreign populations, with deliberate plans to create deniable incidents that could later justify military intervention. The names listed as authorizing the program included not just Senator Blackwood, but 3 former cabinet secretaries, a CIA director, and numerous still active officials in positions of power. The implications were staggering, not just corruption or overreach, but war crimes authorized at the highest levels of government. Jonathan Morgan had discovered not just evidence of past wrongdoing, but documentation of an ongoing program that had continued into the present day under different code names and in different conflict zones. His final instructions were explicit: deliver the evidence to specific journalists and oversight committees he had identified as trustworthy individuals beyond the reach of the conspiracy. The letter's final paragraphs shifted from operational instructions to personal message. "Rachel, Michael, I don't know if I'll return from this mission. If I don't know that everything I've done has been to protect the country I love and the principles I swore to defend. Sometimes the greatest loyalty requires the courage to stand against those who have betrayed their oaths. Rachel, even at 3, I see in you the same determination and sense of justice that drives me. Michael, your gentle heart balanced with quiet strength reminds me daily why this fight matters. I hope to tell you both these things in person, to watch you grow into the remarkable people I know you'll become. But if fate decides otherwise, know that my love for you transcends whatever happens in Samara. If you're reading this years from now, as adults, know that I would be proud of you both, whatever paths you've chosen. And know that the truth, however long buried, eventually finds the light. With all my love, your father, Jonathan Morgan." Rachel carefully refolded the letter, emotions warring within her as she reconciled the tactical imperative of her situation with the personal revelation of finally hearing her father's voice across a 32-year void. The data device contained the evidence: technical specifications of Project Helios deployment records, test results, authorization signatures, and most damning of all, video documentation of deliberate releases in controlled environments, a clinical euphemism for populated areas in Iraq. This was what Senator Blackwood and his associates had killed to protect. Not just evidence of past crimes, but documentation that could implicate dozens of still active officials in ongoing operations. The kind of evidence that could not just end careers, but result in international tribunals and criminal prosecutions. And somewhere in a facility codenamed Blackfish, her father might still be alive, imprisoned for refusing to betray the oath he had sworn to the Constitution rather than to men. Rachel secured the evidence in her pack and assessed her next move. With Harper dead and Reed and Winters likely compromised, she needed new allies, individuals beyond Blackwood's immediate reach, with the resources to protect the evidence and the platform to expose it. As she prepared to leave the storage facility, her burner phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number. Winters and Reed secured. Extraction team en route to your GPS location. Eddie Thompson network activated. Stand by. A surge of hope coursed through Rachel. Eddie's network of friends had apparently been more extensive and better organized than she'd realized. If Reed and Winters were safe, she wasn't operating alone against Blackwood's resources. Rachel sent a brief acknowledgement and moved to a position offering better defensive coverage while maintaining sight lines to potential approach vectors. Within 15 minutes, she spotted a grounds maintenance truck approaching along a service road, identical to dozens of others working the Arlington property daily. The driver, a silver-haired man Rachel didn't recognize, flashed headlights in a specific pattern matching Eddie's military identification number, a verification protocol from an era before digital authentication. Rachel emerged cautiously, maintaining awareness of potential surveillance. "Major Morgan," the driver asked as she approached. "Name's Jackson. Eddie sent me. Says you've got something that needs protecting." "And Reed Winters. Secure at fallback location." "Charlie, we need to move. Kelso's people have established checkpoints at all major exits." Rachel assessed the man carefully before committing. "Eddie's call sign during Desert Storm." Jackson smiled grimly, appreciating the security check. "Dusty Devil. First aircraft shot down was in Mi-24 Hind on February 17, 1991. Details only a fellow pilot from that conflict would know." Rachel nodded and climbed into the truck. "Where are we going?" "First, to reunite you with Reed and Winters, then to someone who can help distribute that evidence where it can't be buried again." Jackson put the truck in gear and proceeded along the service road, passing a security checkpoint with nothing more than a casual wave to guards who recognized the maintenance vehicle. "Someone you trust?" Rachel asked. Jackson's expression hardened. "Someone your father trusted. She's been waiting 32 years for this moment." As they cleared the Arlington perimeter and merged with Washington traffic, Rachel felt a profound shift in the mission parameters. What had begun as a search for answers about her father had evolved into something far larger. The exposure of a conspiracy spanning decades and reaching into the highest levels of government. And somewhere in a facility called Blackfish, a prisoner who had refused to break might finally see vindication for his sacrifice. In the rearview mirror, Rachel could see Arlington House receding into the distance, its stately columns unchanged after 2 centuries of American history. The secrets it had harbored for 32 years were now in her possession, and with them perhaps the key to her father's freedom. Behind them, Alexander Kelso stood on the steps of Arlington House, speaking urgently into a secure phone. "Target has the evidence and is mobile. Morgan's old network has activated. We need to implement Protocol Omega." The voice that responded belonged to Senator Blackwood, its customary refinement replaced with cold authority. "Find her. Recover the evidence. Eliminate anyone who's seen it." A brief pause. "And prepare Blackfish for immediate termination. No loose ends, Alex." "None." "Understood, Senator. No loose ends." The shadow war that had begun in the Iraqi desert 32 years ago was entering its final phase, with Rachel Morgan now at its center, and her father's life hanging in the balance. Twilight settled over the Washington suburbs, as Jackson's maintenance truck wound through residential streets, taking an indirect route to avoid potential surveillance. Rachel Morgan sat in tense silence, the evidence from Arlington House secured in her pack, her mind processing the implications of her father's hidden message. After 30 minutes of careful navigation, they approached a modest two-story colonial in Alexandria, its unremarkable appearance blending perfectly with neighboring homes. Jackson pulled into the garage, the door closing automatically behind them. "Welcome to Safe House Bravo," he said, killing the engine. One of 5 maintained by Eddie's network since 1992. "Eddie's network," Rachel repeated. "Just how extensive is this organization?" Jackson's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Not an organization, Major. A brotherhood. Veterans who served with your father Sullivan and others connected to Quicksilver. Men and women who knew something wasn't right when the official story came down." They entered the house through an interior door, revealing a surprisingly modern command center disguised within the traditional exterior. Reed and Winters were waiting along with 2 unfamiliar faces, a silver-haired woman in her 70s studying satellite imagery on a wall-mounted display, and a tall African-American man inspecting weapons at a side table. "Rachel," Reed greeted her with visible relief. "Thank God. When we lost contact at Arlington." "Harper's dead," Rachel reported flatly. "Sacrificed himself so I could escape with this." She placed the metal case on the central table. The silver-haired woman turned from the monitors, fixing Rachel with a penetrating gaze. "So Jonathan's fail-safe worked after all these years." Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command. "I'm Catherine Hastings, former DIA, now nominally retired." "Catherine was your father's handler for 3 operations before Quicksilver," Reed explained, "one of the few in intelligence he trusted completely. And one of the first to question the official report of his death," Hastings added, "though it cost me my position and nearly my freedom." The African-American man stepped forward, offering a respectful nod. "Marcus Wilson, ma'am. Force Recon, served with your brother in Afghanistan before the incident." Rachel felt the pieces connecting. Not just a random collection of veterans, but a carefully cultivated network spanning generations of service members, all linked through personal connections to the Quicksilver conspiracy. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked, the tactical implications becoming clear. "Since you returned from Syria," Wilson acknowledged. "Standard protection protocol for family members of Quicksilver personnel. When Sullivan made contact at Luigi's, we escalated to active support status." Rachel processed this revelation with mixed emotions: surprise at being under surveillance, gratitude for the protection, but also anger at being kept in the dark about her own family's history. "Speaking of Sullivan," she said, glancing around the room, "what happened to him after the hospital? Is he alive?" A momentary silence fell over the room before Hastings responded. "We've confirmed he was transferred to a secure medical facility in Maryland, officially a military rehabilitation center, but actually a containment site for persons of interest to national security. Our contacts inside indicate he's alive, but heavily sedated." "Can we extract him?" Rachel asked. "Not without compromising our primary objectives," Hastings replied. "The Maryland facility is significantly harder to penetrate than a civilian hospital, but once we've exposed Quicksilver publicly, we'll have leverage to secure his release through official channels." Rachel nodded, accepting the tactical assessment while filing away Sullivan's situation as unfinished business. The man had risked everything to find her, to start this chain of events. She wouldn't abandon him. "The evidence," Hastings prompted, gesturing to the case. "What did Jonathan hide?" Rachel opened the case, revealing the data device and her father's letter. Project Helios wasn't just unauthorized weapons transferred to Iraq. It was a deliberate testing program for biological agents on civilian populations authorized at the highest levels of government. As she connected the device to a secure terminal displaying files Jonathan Morgan had risked everything to preserve: technical specifications, deployment records, authorization signatures, and video documentation that left no doubt about the program's nature and scope. 7 different release scenarios, Rachel continued navigating through the files, each designed to test different dispersal methods and effectiveness parameters, disguised as Iraqi military operations to maintain deniability. The room fell silent as the implications registered. This wasn't just corruption or overreach. These were war crimes authorized by senior American officials, including the man now campaigning for the presidency. Blackwood, Winters said grimly, studying the signature pages, along with 3 cabinet members and multiple agency directors, some still in government. It didn't end with Desert Storm, Rachel added. My father's notes indicate the program continued under different code names in different theaters. The same methodology applied to newer agents. Hastings nodded, unsurprised. We've tracked suspicious disease outbreaks in conflict zones for decades, patterns that suggested engineered pathogens rather than natural occurrence, but never had proof of American involvement. Now we do, Reed said quietly. Definitive evidence linking current officials to war crimes. And there's more, Rachel continued, pulling up Harper's documentation of the facility codenamed Blackfish. Harper believed my father might be alive, held at this location. The satellite imagery showed a remote compound in what appeared to be desert terrain, its nondescript buildings surrounded by sophisticated security measures. No identifying features revealed its location. I know this facility, Hastings said, studying the images. It's not on any official registry. Black budget compartmentalized access. Officially, a special research installation in Department of Defense documentation. Where? Rachel demanded. Nevada, remote section of government land adjacent to Nellis Test Range. Technically, doesn't exist. Wilson approached the display, professional assessment evident in his expression. Heavy security, minimal staffing, classic black site architecture designed for containing high-value detainees with maximum security, minimum witnesses. Rachel felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. My father's there. If he's alive, Reed cautioned gently. Rachel, it's been 32 years. He's alive, Rachel insisted. Why else maintain a facility like this? Why eliminate everyone connected to Quicksilver decades after the fact? They're not just hiding past crimes, they're protecting current operations. Hastings nodded slowly. Jonathan knew too much, had seen too much. Killing him would have been simpler, but they needed to know what evidence he'd secured and who else might have access. 32 years of interrogation, Winters murmured, the horror of the concept evident in his voice. Or 32 years of resistance, Rachel countered. The evidence survived, which means he never broke. The realization cast her father's sacrifice in a new light. Not just a moment of heroism in the Iraqi desert, but decades of endurance against unimaginable pressure. We need to move quickly, Hastings said, returning to tactical considerations. Blackwood knows you have the evidence. His cleaner Kelso will be implementing containment protocols as we speak. Meaning, Rachel asked, meaning he'll eliminate everyone connected to the evidence, including your father, if he's at Blackfish. Hastings's expression was grim. No loose ends. The stakes crystallized in Rachel's mind. Not just exposing historical crimes, but potentially saving her father's life. Assuming he was still alive after 32 years of captivity. 2 parallel operations, she decided, military training asserting itself. One team secures and distributes the evidence where it can't be buried. Another team assesses blackfish for potential extraction. Wilson nodded approvingly. Classic pincer strategy. Force the enemy to divide resources. It's risky, Reed cautioned. Blackwood has significant resources, government assets, private contractors. We're a handful of veterans and one active-duty ranger. We're not alone, Jackson interjected, gesturing to a communications terminal where messages were steadily arriving. Eddie's activated the full network. 37 operators standing by, all with special operations backgrounds, plus support personnel. Rachel was stunned by the scope of the response. All these people, for a 32-year-old mission. For your father, Hastings corrected. Jonathan Morgan wasn't just respected, he was beloved. The kind of officer men would follow into hell without hesitation. When word spread he might be alive, the implications were clear. Her father had inspired the kind of loyalty that transcended decades' retirement, even official orders. These veterans were willing to risk everything based on that bond. I'll handle evidence distribution, Hastings said decisively. I still have contacts in media and oversight committees, people Jonathan identified as trustworthy. We'll create simultaneous releases in multiple channels too widespread to contain. I'll take blackfish, Rachel said immediately. My father, my mission. Not alone, Wilson countered. I've done 3 tours in special operations. I'll assemble a team from network volunteers, small, experienced, precise. Rachel wanted to argue, but recognized the tactical sense. A solo approach to a black site would be suicide regardless of her training. How soon can we move? She asked. Evidence distribution can begin immediately, Hastings replied. Blackfish will require more preparation, 12 hours minimum for proper intelligence equipment and team assembly. Blackwood won't wait that long, Rachel objected. If he thinks his operation is compromised, he'll clean house, Wilson acknowledged grimly. Starting with blackfish. The room fell silent as the deadly calculus became clear. Every hour increased the risk that Jonathan Morgan, if he was indeed at the facility, would be eliminated as a security precaution. 8 hours, Rachel decided. That's our operational window. Hastings begins evidence distribution immediately to divide Blackwood's attention. Wilson and I prepare for blackfish insertion. Wheels up in 8 hours. The veterans exchanged glances, professional assessment evident in their expressions. The timeline was aggressive, but not impossible. I'm coming too, Reed said firmly. If Jonathan's been in captivity for 32 years, he'll need immediate medical assessment. That's my specialty. Rachel nodded, recognizing the validity of Reed's expertise. Winters. The former Marine smiled grimly. Someone needs to fly the insertion helicopter. Might as well be the old man who taught your father to shoot. The pieces fell into place. A hastily assembled team of aging veterans and one active-duty ranger preparing to assault a black site on the slim chance of rescuing a man imprisoned for 3 decades. The odds were nearly impossible. But as Rachel studied the determined faces around her, she recognized something powerful at work. The same bond of loyalty and shared purpose that had defined military service across generations. These men and women had carried the burden of Quicksilver's secrets for 32 years, waiting for this moment of reckoning. 8 hours. Hastings confirmed, already moving toward the communications terminal. God help us all. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Rachel found herself alone with her father's letter. She reread his final words written hours before his disappearance. The truth, however long buried, eventually finds the light. After 32 years in darkness, that light was finally approaching. Alexander Kelso moved through Senator Blackwood's private office with efficient precision securing documents and initiating containment protocols while maintaining a calm exterior that belied the crisis unfolding around him. The evidence is confirmed in Morgan's possession. He reported standing before Blackwood's desk with perfect military posture despite the late hour. Multiple distribution channels are now at risk. Blackwood, still immaculate in a tailored suit despite the midnight hour, betrayed only slight tension in his jawline. And Harper, eliminated. Unfortunately, he created sufficient diversion for Morgan to escape with the evidence. Kelso's tone remained professional, acknowledging the failure without emotion. We tracked her to Alexandria, but lost the signal. Assessment suggests she's connected with Eddie Thompson's network. Thompson, Blackwood repeated, recognition flickering in his eyes. The helicopter pilot from Desert Storm. I thought he was neutralized years ago. Monitored, but not eliminated. Assessment suggested he had no access to actionable intelligence. Kelso's expression tightened fractionally. That assessment appears to have been flawed. Blackwood rose from his desk, moving to the window overlooking the Washington Monument, illuminated against the night sky. How many in this network? Unknown. Initial estimates suggest dozens, possibly more. Former Special Operations personnel, intelligence officers, support specialists. Multi-generational compartmentalized structure. All for Jonathan Morgan. Blackwood murmured, a note of reluctant admiration in his voice, even after 32 years. Your orders, Senator. Blackwood turned from the window, decision crystallizing in his expression. Protocol Omega. Full implementation. Kelso nodded once, understanding the implications. Protocol Omega represented the nuclear option in their contingency planning. Complete elimination of all evidence witnesses and operational sites connected to Quicksilver and its successor programs. Blackfish is the priority, Blackwood continued. If Morgan's daughter has the evidence, she'll inevitably discover the facility's existence. We can't risk what's contained there becoming public. The detainee, Kelso asked carefully. Blackwood's expression hardened. After 32 years, Jonathan Morgan has exhausted his intelligence value. He's now a liability. Understood. Termination order for the detainee, followed by facility sterilization. How quickly can it be implemented? 6 hours for personnel evacuation and core data transfer. Another 2 for complete sterilization. Kelso consulted his secure tablet. Blackfish will be fully neutralized by 0800 hours. Expedite, Blackwood ordered. I want that site empty by dawn. And Morgan's daughter. Find her, recover or destroy the evidence. She's active military, so avoid termination if possible. The investigation would be problematic. Containment Facility Delta has been prepared if capture is achieved. The implication was clear. Rachel Morgan would join her father in permanent detention if captured alive. One additional concern, Kelso noted. Catherine Hastings has reactivated. Surveillance detected her movement pattern yesterday near Arlington. Blackwood's expression darkened. Hastings was Jonathan's handler. If she's involved, she has media contacts, oversight committee relationships, potential distribution channels for the evidence. Priority 2, then. After Blackfish is secured, eliminate Hastings and any evidence distribution network she's established. Blackwood returned to his desk, activating a secure communication system. I'll handle the political containment, calls to friendly media executives, committee chairs, agency directors. Create fire breaks around any potential evidence release. Kelso nodded and turned to leave, but Blackwood's voice stopped him at the door. Alex, this operation has survived for 32 years because we've been willing to make hard decisions. The greater good has always been our guiding principle. Yes, Senator. Project Helios saved countless American lives in conflicts that followed. The public couldn't understand the necessary calculus then. They still can't now. I understand, sir. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and Kelso allowed himself a personal question. Sir, I've served this program for 20 years. Was it worth it? All of it. Blackwood's penetrating gaze studied his most trusted operative. You've seen the intelligence reports, Alex. The regional conflicts contained through targeted biological deployments. The enemy combatants neutralized without conventional military engagement. The American lives saved by not requiring boots on ground. And the civilian casualties, the test subjects. Acceptable losses in a larger strategic framework. Blackwood's tone hardened. History is written by those who make the difficult choices others can't stomach. We made those choices. Kelso nodded, mask returning. Good night, Senator. Good. Blackwood's tone carried absolute finality. No loose ends this time. None. As Kelso departed, Blackwood remained at his desk, contemplating the empire of secrets he had maintained for over 3 decades. From junior CIA officer to presidential contender, his rise had been fueled by the intelligence and operational advantages derived from Project Helios and its successors. The biological agents developed in those programs had shaped conflicts around the world, always advancing American interests while maintaining perfect deniability. Jonathan Morgan had nearly destroyed everything in 1991. His daughter would not be allowed to succeed where he had failed. Blackwood activated his secure line to the Blackfish facility director. Implement Protocol Omega immediately. Priority detainee termination followed by complete facility sterilization. Authorization, Blackwood Alpha 79. The response came immediately. Understood, Senator. Termination team dispatched to detainment level. Estimated completion of primary objective 90 minutes. Confirmation required. Visual confirmation will be transmitted on secure channel upon completion. Blackwood ended the call, a sense of finality settling over him. After 32 years, Jonathan Morgan's stubborn resistance would finally end. The man had been offered cooperation countless times over the decades, opportunities to join the program and understand its importance to national security. His continued refusal had been frustrating, but ultimately meaningless. The programs had advanced without him, expanded their scope and effectiveness across multiple theaters. Now that chapter would close permanently, along with the facility that had housed Morgan for 3 decades. By morning, Blackfish would be an empty shell, its records transferred, its personnel reassigned, its single detainee eliminated. And with him, the last living witness to the origins of America's most classified weapons program. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the unmarked helicopter as it skimmed low over the Nevada terrain, following the contours of the land to minimize radar signature. Inside the stripped-down military transport, Rachel Morgan performed final equipment checks, alongside Marcus Wilson and a 4-person extraction team, veterans selected from Eddie Thompson's network for their specialized skills. Approaching target 10 minutes out, Winters called from the cockpit, his voice steady despite the dangerous insertion they were attempting. Still no indication our approach has been detected. Rachel acknowledged with a thumbs up, then returned to reviewing the tactical display. Satellite imagery of Blackfish showed a deceptively simple compound. 3 surface buildings surrounded by perimeter fencing, resembling countless government research installations scattered across the southwest. But the thermal imaging told a different story. Extensive underground infrastructure extending several levels below the visible structures, with heat signatures indicating substantial power systems and life support for a facility much larger than its surface footprint suggested. Classic black site architecture, Wilson observed, studying the display beside her. Public face is minimal, just enough presence to justify the security perimeter. Real operation is underground, hidden from satellite observation. Reed, wearing tactical medical gear over her civilian clothes, leaned forward to examine the images. Thermal signatures are showing unusual activity patterns, much more movement than expected for a containment facility. They're evacuating, Rachel concluded, recognizing the signs from her own operational experience. Blackwood's implementing cleanup protocols. The implications were immediately clear to everyone aboard. If Blackfish was being evacuated, any detainees would likely be eliminated rather than transferred. Their already narrow window for rescue was closing rapidly. New plan, Rachel decided. We can't wait for the cover of full darkness. We insert now, using their evacuation activity as cover for our approach. Wilson nodded agreement. Evacuation means standard security protocols will be disrupted. Guards focusing on equipment transport, personnel movement. Creates opportunities. And risks, Rachel acknowledged. They'll be on higher alert for external threats during critical operations. If they're evacuating, Reed interjected, they may have already moved your father, or worse. The possibility hung heavy in the helicopter's confined space. Rachel forced it aside, focusing on actionable intelligence rather than fear. Thermal imaging still shows activity on the lowest level, she pointed out. If my father's being held, it would be in the most secure area, furthest from surface access points. Agreed, Wilson said. High-value detainees are always kept deep. Maximum security, minimum escape potential. Rachel outlined their adjusted approach. A fast rope insertion at the northeastern perimeter, where thermal imaging showed minimal guard presence, followed by small team infiltration during shift rotation. Wilson would lead 2 operators to secure their exfiltration route, while Rachel, Reed, and the remaining team member would penetrate to the lowest level to locate and extract her father. If he's there, Reed said quietly, giving voice to the doubt they all carried. If he's there, Rachel acknowledged. And if he's not, we still extract with any intelligence we can gather about where he might have been taken. The mission parameters were straightforward, but the execution would be anything but. Blackfish, despite being in evacuation mode, remained a hardened government black site, with trained security personnel and advanced countermeasures. Their small team was attempting what would normally require a full special operations squadron with extensive intelligence support. 5 minutes to insertion point, Winters called from the cockpit. Still undetected on approach. Rachel moved to the helicopter's open door, feeling the rush of desert air as she prepared for fast rope descent. Behind her, Wilson and the extraction team made final weapons checks. Sound-suppressed firearms, non-lethal alternatives, breaching equipment. This wasn't a standard military operation with rules of engagement and clear jurisdictional authority. They were American citizens assaulting an American government facility, an act that could be classified as anything from trespassing to domestic terrorism depending on who controlled the narrative afterward. But as Rachel secured her rappelling harness, those legal considerations seemed abstract compared to the immediate reality. Somewhere below them, the father she had mourned for 32 years might still be alive hours or even minutes from execution as part of Blackwood's cleanup operation. 1 minute, Winters announced. Good hunting. I'll maintain position at the secondary extraction point until your signal. The helicopter slowed to a hover over the designated insertion zone, a shadow-cloaked area near the perimeter fence selected for its minimal security coverage. Rachel was first out fast roping to the desert floor with practiced efficiency, followed by Wilson and the extraction team in rapid succession. As the helicopter pulled away, disappearing into the darkness to await their extraction call, Rachel led the team toward the perimeter barrier, a seemingly conventional security fence that undoubtedly concealed more sophisticated countermeasures. Wilson deployed a specialized scanner, confirming their intelligence assessment. Motion sensors, seismic triggers, thermal detection grid. but they're running evacuation protocols. Systems showing multiple security overrides active. Their focus is on getting out, not keeping people in, Rachel observed. Creates vulnerabilities. Using equipment provided by Eddie's network, they exploited a temporary gap in the security coverage, slipping through the perimeter during a scheduled system reset that was part of the evacuation sequence. Tactical movement brought them to the shadow of the primary surface structure, an administrative building with the innocuous signage of a Department of Energy research facility. Inside, thermal imaging revealed the expected evacuation activity. Personnel moving equipment, securing files, preparing the facility for complete shutdown. But Rachel's focus remained on the subterranean levels where the true purpose of Blackfish was concealed. Access point here. Wilson indicated, directing them to a service entrance partly concealed by equipment storage. Maintenance access to lower levels, less monitored than primary elevators during standard operations. And during evacuation, Rachel asked, likely being used for equipment extraction, our best chance to blend with ongoing activity. The assessment proved accurate. Using maintenance coveralls over their tactical gear, standard equipment for covert insertions, the team entered through the service door during a pause in evacuation operations. The corridor beyond led to a freight elevator that thermal imaging had shown extending to all subterranean levels. Rachel checked her watch, 27 minutes since insertion with no security alerts triggered. Better than expected, but every passing minute increased the risk that their target might already be gone or terminated. The freight elevator required security authorization, but Wilson's technical specialist had come prepared with access codes obtained through Eddie's network. The source remained unspecified, but Rachel suspected Catherine Hastings' lingering intelligence connections had provided the critical data. Lowest level, Rachel directed as they entered the elevator. Maximum security section. The elevator descended smoothly past multiple sublevels, each dedicated to different aspects of the facility's operation. Research spaces, staff areas, secure data centers. Finally, it reached the lowest level, where the doors opened onto a stark corridor with the unmistakable architecture of a detention area. Unlike the upper levels, which buzzed with evacuation activity, this section maintained an ominous quiet. Security protocols here would be different. Specialized personnel, higher authorization requirements, separate evacuation procedures for whatever was being contained. Or whoever. Life signs, Rachel asked quietly, as Wilson deployed a thermal scanner designed to penetrate the reinforced walls. Minimal staffing, he reported. 4 security personnel at the control station. 2 additional signatures in what appears to be a medical monitoring room. His expression tightened. And 1 signature in the central containment cell. Stationary prone position. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. My father, unknown, but it's the only detainee signature on this level. Reed checked her medical pack. Vital signs. Stable but weak. Consistent with sedation or sleep. The tactical approach was clear but challenging. Neutralize the security station without triggering facility-wide alerts, secure the medical monitoring room, and extract the detainee before evacuation protocols could bring reinforcements from upper levels. Reed, you're with me for the detainee, Rachel decided. Wilson, take Johnson and secure the security station. Martinez covers our exit route and monitors facility communications. With practiced efficiency, the team moved into position. Wilson and Johnson approached the security station using the maintenance cover, a common sight during evacuation procedures, while Rachel and Reed circled toward the detention area through a parallel corridor. The element of surprise worked in their favor. Wilson's team neutralized the security personnel with non-lethal methods, fast-acting sedatives delivered through compressed air systems disguised as maintenance equipment. Standard procedure for covert extractions where minimizing casualties was prioritized. Security station secure, Wilson reported through their communications system. Accessing control systems now. Be advised. Monitored communications indicate termination order active for the detainee. Execution team dispatched from upper level estimated arrival 8 minutes. Rachel's blood ran cold at the confirmation. They had arrived just in time. Blackwood's cleanup operation was already in its final phase. Override door controls to the detention cell, she ordered, and loop the security cameras to mask our approach. Working on it. System requires biometric confirmation for detention-level access. Use the security officer's credentials. Affirmative. You have access in 3, 2, 1. Now. The reinforced door to the detention section slid open, revealing a clinically austere corridor with a single cell at its center. More hospital room than prison cell with medical monitoring equipment surrounding a hospital-style bed. And on that bed, a figure lay motionless under bright institutional lighting. Rachel approached with tactical caution, Reed close behind with medical scanner already active. The room's occupant was an elderly man, thin to the point of emaciation, with white hair cropped short in military fashion. Medical monitoring equipment tracked vital signs, while an IV delivered what appeared to be sedatives to maintain compliant unconsciousness. Life signs stable, Reed reported, examining the readouts. Long-term sedation protocol, nutritional support, minimal muscle atrophy maintenance. Her voice tightened with professional outrage. They've kept him in medically induced semi-consciousness for years. Awake enough for interrogation, sedated enough to prevent resistance or escape planning. Rachel moved closer, studying the man's features through the emotional storm threatening her professional detachment. The face was gaunt, deeply lined, aged beyond his chronological years by decades of captivity. But the underlying structure was unmistakable. The same strong jawline she saw in mirror reflections, the same distinctive brow her brother had inherited. "It's him," she whispered, certainty resonating through her. "It's my father." Reed was already disconnecting monitoring equipment, preparing for transport. "We need to reduce the sedation gradually. Sudden withdrawal could trigger cardiovascular complications after such long-term administration." "No time," Rachel responded, checking her tactical timer. "Execution team less than 5 minutes out. We move now." Wilson appeared at the doorway. "Transport gurney secured from medical bay. But we have a complication. Facility communications indicate Blackwood himself is monitoring the termination order. Visual confirmation required upon execution." The implications were immediately clear. Blackwood wanted absolute certainty that Jonathan Morgan was eliminated with no possibility of error or deception. Their window for clean extraction was closing rapidly. "Prepare for immediate transport," Rachel ordered. "Reed, stabilize him as best you can during movement. Wilson, we need a diversion to mask our exit." With practiced efficiency, they transferred Jonathan Morgan to the transport gurney, Reed maintaining the critical IV lines while adjusting medication flow to begin the process of reducing sedation. His unconscious state was simultaneously blessing and curse, allowing easier transport but preventing confirmation of his mental condition after decades of captivity. Wilson deployed his remaining team members to strategic locations, creating a cascading series of security breaches on upper levels to draw attention away from their extraction route. The tactic would buy them precious minutes, but at the cost of alerting the facility that something beyond standard evacuation was occurring. Martinez reports execution team has been redirected to the Level 2 breach. Wilson updated as they moved toward the freight elevator with their unconscious charge. Estimated new window for extraction, 7 minutes. Rachel nodded, maintaining tactical focus despite the emotional surreality of finally finding her father. Decades of believing him dead, of visiting an empty memorial stone at Arlington, had not prepared her for the visceral reality of the emaciated figure on the gurney, a living ghost from a classified war that had never truly ended. The elevator ascent felt agonizingly slow, each sublevel bringing them closer to the surface, but also increasing the risk of encounter with security or evacuation personnel. Rachel maintained defensive position, weapon ready, but hidden beneath her maintenance coveralls. Approaching ground level, Wilson warned. Be advised, thermal scanning shows increased security presence in response to our diversions. Primary exit route compromised. Rachel quickly assessed alternatives. Secondary route through equipment loading bay. Evacuation protocols should have vehicles staged for equipment transport. Affirmative. Rerouting. The elevator opened onto the ground level, where the previously ordered evacuation had accelerated in response to the security breaches. Personnel moved with greater urgency, focused on their assigned tasks, rather than questioning a medical transport gurney being escorted by maintenance workers, a common sight during facility shutdown procedures. Rachel guided their procession toward the loading bay, maintaining unhurried purpose that avoided drawing attention. Reed monitored Jonathan's vital signs continuously, making micro-adjustments to medication levels as they moved. "How is he?" Rachel asked quietly as they navigated a less trafficked corridor. "Stable," Reed replied. "But 32 years of controlled sedation will require specialized treatment for recovery. Physical rehabilitation, psychological support." She hesitated. "Rachel, you should prepare yourself. Even if his body recovers, his mind may not be what you remember." "He's alive," Rachel responded simply. After 32 years of imprisonment, that's enough for now." They reached the loading bay where vehicles were being prepared for equipment transport. Wilson identified their target, a medical transport van likely intended for sensitive research materials. 2 facility personnel were loading the vehicle, their focus on inventory manifests rather than security protocols. "Johnson, create a diversion at the south entrance," Wilson directed through their communication system. "Martinez, stand by to secure the vehicle." The coordinated movement unfolded with precision. Johnson triggered a minor equipment malfunction at the south entrance, drawing the attention of loading bay personnel. Martinez secured the transport van, while Wilson neutralized the 2 inventory specialists with the same non-lethal methods used at the security station. "Vehicle secured," Wilson reported. "Loading now." They transferred Jonathan Morgan's gurney into the medical transport, Reed continuing her care, while Rachel and Wilson prepared for departure. Martinez provided final diversion by triggering the loading bay's fire suppression system, creating momentary confusion that covered their vehicle's departure. "Exiting facility perimeter," Wilson confirmed as they passed through the security checkpoint, their vehicle's medical transport designation providing sufficient clearance during evacuation procedures. "Proceeding to extraction point Alpha for helicopter rendezvous." Rachel maintained tactical awareness despite the overwhelming urge to focus solely on her father's unconscious form. They had successfully extracted him from Blackfish, but remained in hostile territory with pursuit likely once his absence was discovered. Only when they reached the designated extraction point where Winters would be waiting with the helicopter could they consider the first phase complete. "How long until he regains consciousness?" she asked Reed, allowing herself a moment of personal concern now that immediate tactical demands had eased. "Impossible to predict with certainty," Reed replied, continuing to monitor vital signs. "I'm administering counter-agents to the sedatives, but after such long-term administration, his body will respond unpredictably." She hesitated, then added gently, "Rachel, you should also prepare for the possibility that he may not recognize you. You were 3 when he disappeared." The reality struck Rachel with unexpected force. She had focused so completely on finding her father that she hadn't fully processed what his recovery might actually mean. The man being transported was not the vibrant Delta Force commander from photographs and stories, but an elderly prisoner who had spent more than 3 decades in captivity subjected to unknown interrogation methods and psychological pressures. When he regained consciousness, would Jonathan Morgan still exist within that damaged shell, or had Blackwood's imprisonment destroyed everything except the physical form? "We'll handle whatever condition he's in," Rachel said, firmly pushing aside the doubts. "The priority is getting him to secure medical facilities." Wilson, driving with the focused precision of an experienced operator, checked their tactical display. No immediate pursuit detected. Facility likely still processing the security breaches and evacuating critical personnel. "They'll realize he's missing during the execution team's sweep," Rachel noted. "How long until we reach extraction point Alpha?" 17 minutes, Wilson calculated. Winters is already in position. The desert landscape passed in monochromatic shadows as they navigated using minimal lights, following predetermined routes that minimized exposure to surveillance systems. Behind them, Blackfish continued its accelerated evacuation. The facility's true purpose soon to be erased from official record, but not before they had extracted its most closely guarded secret. In the transport's medical compartment, Jonathan Morgan remained unconscious, medical monitors tracking the gradual changes as Reed carefully managed his transition from sedation. His vital signs remained stable, but fluctuations in brain activity suggested the first stirrings of returning consciousness. "Rachel," Reed called softly from the medical compartment. "You should see this." Rachel moved back from her tactical position, kneeling beside the gurney where her father lay. Reed pointed to his hand, which had begun to move, fingers twitching slightly, then forming what appeared to be deliberate patterns. "That's not random movement," Reed explained. "That's military signal code. He's communicating." Rachel watched in astonishment as her father's fingers tapped out a sequence she recognized from her own training. Basic identification protocol taught to special operations personnel for situations where verbal communication was impossible. "Jonathan, Morgan," she translated aloud. "DELTA, FORC." The pattern repeated, then expanded to include new information. "HELIOS, BLACKWOO. He's orienting himself," Reed explained, "establishing core identity elements before full consciousness returns. It's a psychological anchoring technique taught to operators who might face extreme disorientation." "He's still a soldier," Rachel whispered, watching the deliberate movements with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. "After everything they did to him, that core identity survived." Reed nodded, professional assessment tempered with compassion. "Special operations selection prioritizes psychological resilience above all else. Your father had that in extraordinary measure." The vehicle slowed as they approached the extraction point, a flat area of desert terrain selected for helicopter landing. Wilson confirmed Winters's presence through secure communications. "Helicopter in position. No pursuit detected. Beginning final approach." As they reached the extraction point, the unmarked helicopter descended rotors, kicking up swirls of desert dust, illuminated by minimal safety lighting. The transfer would be the most vulnerable phase of their operation, exposed stationary with limited defensive options if pursuit arrived. Reed prepared the gurney for transfer, while Rachel and Wilson established perimeter security. Martinez secured the approach vector from the direction of Blackfish, while Johnson prepared the helicopter for immediate loading. 60 seconds to complete transfer, Wilson calculated, maintaining tactical command of the extraction phase. The gurney was halfway to the helicopter when Rachel's tactical instincts triggered warning signals. A momentary flash on the distant horizon followed by the distinctive engine sound of approaching vehicles. "Pursuit detected," she called sharply. "Multiple vehicles approaching from Blackfish direction. ETA 3 minutes." "Accelerate loading," Wilson ordered, adjusting the operation timeline. "Prepare for defensive positions if needed." The team moved with increased urgency, transferring Jonathan Morgan's gurney into the helicopter while maintaining security coverage. Reed secured medical equipment for transport, ensuring continuous monitoring during the flight. "Ready for departure," Winters confirmed from the cockpit. "All personnel aboard, negative," Wilson responded. "Martinez covering rear approach. Johnson securing vehicle." The approaching vehicles were now visible. Multiple SUVs moving at high speed across the desert terrain, tactical lights illuminating their path. Their intercept course would reach the extraction point within minutes. "Martinez Johnson, immediate extraction," Rachel ordered. "Defensive delay no longer viable against those numbers." The team members acknowledged abandoning their positions to board the helicopter. As Martinez cleared the perimeter, incoming fire erupted from the lead pursuit vehicle, the distinctive sound of automatic weapons cutting through the desert night. "Taking fire," Wilson reported calmly. "All personnel aboard except Johnson." Rachel moved to the helicopter door, providing covering fire, while Johnson sprinted the final distance from the abandoned medical transport. The pursuit's vehicles continued their approach, now close enough to deploy personnel for ground assault. "Johnson's hit," Martinez called as their teammate stumbled mid-stride, clutching his leg. Rachel reacted instantly, leaving cover to assist the wounded operator. Suppressing fire from Wilson provided momentary protection as she reached Johnson, supporting his weight as they covered the remaining distance to the helicopter. "Everyone aboard," Rachel confirmed as they cleared the door. "Immediate departure." Winters needed no further prompting, the helicopter lifting off as pursuit vehicles reached the extraction point. Gunfire continued from below, bullets striking the helicopter's reinforced underbelly as they gained altitude and distance. "Damage assessment," Rachel called to the cockpit. "Minor impacts, no critical systems affected," Winters reported. "We're clear for primary flight path to safe house coordinates." In the helicopter's medical compartment, Reed had already begun treating Johnson's wound, A through and through to the upper thigh that had missed major arteries. The operator remained conscious, tactical focus overriding pain as he assisted with his own treatment. "Status on primary package," Wilson asked, referring to Jonathan Morgan. "Stable," Reed confirmed. "Increasing signs of consciousness returning. Estimated full awareness within 2 to 3 hours, depending on how his system processes the counter-agents." Rachel moved to her father's side, studying his face in the helicopter's subdued lighting. The fingers continued their deliberate movement, now forming new patterns. RACHEL. MICHAEL. Her breath caught as she recognized her own name, followed by her brother's. Somehow, through decades of captivity and chemical sedation, Jonathan Morgan had maintained his core memories, including his children's names. "I'm here," she said softly, placing her hand over his. "Rachel's here, Dad." The fingers stilled momentarily under her touch, then formed a new pattern against her palm. FOUNDYOU. Tears blurred Rachel's vision as the message registered. Not confusion or disorientation, but recognition. Whatever damage the years of captivity had inflicted, her father's essential self remained intact enough to recognize his daughter's presence even before full consciousness returned. "Mission successful," Wilson confirmed, securing his equipment as the helicopter established its cruising altitude and heading. Primary package secured, all personnel extracted minimal casualties. But Rachel knew their mission was far from complete. They had rescued her father from Blackfish, But Blackwood's resources and reach extended far beyond a single facility. Until the Quicksilver evidence was publicly exposed and Blackwood's operation neutralized, Jonathan Morgan would remain a hunted man, as would everyone involved in his rescue. "Update from Catherine," she asked, returning to operational focus. Wilson checked their secure communications. Evidence distribution proceeding on schedule. Multiple channels activated, first public releases expected within hours. And Blackwood, no direct intelligence, but increased activity detected at key government facilities, suggests containment protocols active across multiple agencies. Rachel nodded, understanding the implications. Blackwood would be implementing maximum damage control, calling in favors from friendly media executives, activating political allies, preparing counter-narratives to discredit any evidence that emerged. But Catherine Hastings had designed the distribution plan specifically to overcome such obstacles. Simultaneous releases through multiple channels, both domestic and international, with supporting documentation provided to oversight committees and law enforcement agencies beyond Blackwood's immediate influence. The evidence her father had hidden 32 years ago was finally emerging into public view, its revelations impossible to contain or dismiss. Project Helios would soon become public knowledge, along with the names of those who had authorized its creation and implementation. As the helicopter continued toward the designated safe house, Rachel maintained her position beside her father, watching for further signs of returning consciousness. The tactical part of her mind remained alert to ongoing threats and operational considerations, but another part, the daughter who had grown up without a father, allowed herself to experience the culmination of a journey she had never expected to complete. Jonathan Morgan was alive. Against all odds, after 32 years of imprisonment, he had survived. Not just physically, but with his core identity and memories intact. Whatever recovery challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The desert landscape passed beneath them, the lights of Las Vegas visible as a distant glow on the horizon. Somewhere in Washington, Senator William Blackwood was about to confront the collapse of a conspiracy 3 decades in the making. The truth her father had sacrificed everything to preserve was finally finding the light. And in that moment, as Jonathan Morgan's fingers formed one more message against her palm, PROUDOF, YOU, Rachel understood that some missions transcended military objectives or national security considerations. Some missions were about the fundamental principles that defined not just a nation, but humanity itself. The truth, however, long buried, eventually finds the light. 6 weeks later, the morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the mountain cabin, illuminating the breakfast table where Rachel Morgan sat across from her father. Jonathan Morgan, still gaunt but steadily recovering carefully, managed the simple act of spreading jam on toast, part of the daily physical therapy that was gradually restoring coordination after decades of chemical sedation. "You're getting better at that," Rachel observed, watching the deliberate movements with a mixture of pride and lingering sadness. Jonathan's eyes, sharp and alert despite his physical limitations, met hers with the hint of a smile. 32 years of practice holding things back from interrogators. Turns out, it's good training for toast. The dark humor had emerged as his consciousness fully returned, a psychological defense mechanism that Reed had explained was common in recovered POWs. Behind it lay trauma that would require years of therapy, but also the extraordinary resilience that had allowed him to survive when others would have broken. Rachel sipped her coffee, glancing at the secure tablet displaying the morning's news headlines. 6 weeks after the evidence release, Project Helios remained front-page news across the globe, the revelations sending shockwaves through governments, intelligence communities, and civilian populations alike. Senate Oversight Committee expands Helios investigation to include 3 administrations. Un special tribunal formally charges 14 American officials with war crimes. Blackwood extradition hearing scheduled for December. The last headline still seemed surreal. Senator William Blackwood, presidential frontrunner architect of America's clandestine biological weapons program, now residing in a maximum security federal detention facility, awaiting potential extradition to face international charges. The evidence Catherine Hastings had distributed had proven impossible to contain or discredit. The simultaneous release through 17 different channels, ranging from major news organizations to specialized oversight committees, had created an information cascade beyond even Blackwood's considerable influence. His attempted escape to a non-extradition country had ended at a private airfield outside Washington, where FBI agents, acting on direct presidential orders, had taken him into custody. The president, blindsided by revelations that members of his own administration had continued aspects of Project Helios, had ordered a comprehensive investigation independent of normal intelligence channels. "Any word on Sullivan?" Jonathan asked the question, bringing Rachel back to the present. "Stable condition at Walter Reed," she reported. "Still under guard, but official status changed from person of interest to material witness. Catherine thinks he'll be released to a private medical facility within weeks." Jonathan nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Frank never gave up. All those years, none of you did," Rachel said quietly. "You Sullivan, Reed, Harper, even those who didn't survive to see this day. 32 years of keeping the faith." The human cost had been substantial. James Harper's body had been found at Arlington, executed by Kelso's team after creating the diversion that allowed Rachel to escape with the evidence. Martinez would walk with a permanent limp from the bullet wound sustained during extraction. And Michael, Rachel's brother, whose death in Afghanistan they now suspected had been arranged after he began accessing classified archives that might have led to Quicksilver. But the truth had finally emerged, not just about Project Helios, but about the systematic elimination of anyone connected to its exposure. The accidents and suicides that had claimed Quicksilver team members over 3 decades were now under official investigation, with Kelso himself providing testimony in exchange for consideration during sentencing. "You should turn on the television," Jonathan suggested, glancing at his watch. "Catherine's testimony begins in 5 minutes. Rachel activated the cabin's satellite television, tuning to C-SPAN, where the Senate Special Committee on Intelligence was preparing to hear from former DIA officer Catherine Hastings. The hearing room was packed with network news cameras positioned to capture testimony that would be broadcast globally. "Strange to see it all in the open," Jonathan commented as Catherine was sworn in. "After so many years of shadows." Rachel nodded, understanding the surreality. For decades, Quicksilver had existed only in classified files and the memories of those directly involved. Now it dominated international headlines, its details dissected by journalists, academics, and ordinary citizens worldwide. As Catherine began her opening statement, recounting the discovery of Project Helios during Desert Storm and the subsequent cover-up, Rachel's secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. The display showed Eddie Thompson's identification. "Eddie," she greeted, stepping onto the cabin's porch for privacy. "How's the network? Standing down most operations," Eddie replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of mission accomplished. "Still maintaining security coverage on key witnesses, but threat assessment has downgraded significantly since Kelso's plea deal. And the facility in Maryland where they were holding Sullivan, being dismantled as we speak. Presidential order. all black sites on domestic soil shut down pending comprehensive review. The systematic changes resulting from the Quicksilver revelations had extended far beyond individual prosecutions. Entire programs were being shut down, oversight protocols via redesigned classification systems reformed. The shockwaves would continue for years. "How's your father doing?" Eddie asked, his tone softening. "Better every day," Rachel replied. "Physically, at least. The psychological recovery will take longer. Tell him his old flight instructor sends regards, and that his sacrifice wasn't wasted." Eddie's voice carried the emotion of a generation of veterans who had carried the burden of Quicksilver's secrets. What he started in Samara finally finished. After ending the call, Rachel remained on the porch, gazing out at the forested mountains that surrounded their secure location. The cabin, one of Catherine's long-established safe houses, had become home during Jonathan's initial recovery, its isolation providing both security and the peaceful environment needed for healing. Inside, she could hear Catherine's testimony continuing on television, methodically laying out the evidence of 3 decades of illegal weapons development, deployment, and cover-up. The reckoning that Jonathan Morgan had sought in 1991 was finally unfolding in the full light of public scrutiny. Rachel's thoughts turned to the future, both immediate and long-term. Her military career was effectively over. Her unauthorized mission to Blackfish had violated too many regulations to allow normal reinstatement despite the exceptional circumstances. The president had privately indicated a pardon would be forthcoming, but her path now lay elsewhere. Jonathan's recovery would require years of specialized treatment. The physical damage from prolonged sedation could be addressed through modern medical protocols, but the psychological impact of 32 years in isolation presented unprecedented challenges. No POW in American history had endured captivity of such duration. Yet despite these challenges, Rachel felt a profound sense of completion. The mission her father had begun in the Iraqi desert had finally reached its conclusion, not just in the exposure of Project Helios, but in the fundamental affirmation that truth could survive even the most determined efforts at suppression. She returned inside to find Jonathan watching Catherine's testimony with intense focus. On screen, the former intelligence officer was displaying documents recovered from the Arlington hiding place, the physical evidence of governmental betrayal that had cost so many lives. "She's doing well," Rachel observed, resuming her seat beside her father. Jonathan nodded. "Catherine always understood the bigger picture. That's why I trusted her with the distribution plan, even back then." "You anticipated everything," Rachel said. "The dog tag fragments, the hidden evidence, the trusted contacts who would still be in position decades later." "Not everything," Jonathan replied, his gaze shifting from the television to his daughter. "I never anticipated you would be the one to finish it, to find me." "I had help," Rachel reminded him. "A lot of it. But you were the catalyst, the one who connected the fragments when no one else could." Pride filled his voice, the same pride that had been expressed in his fingertip code during extraction. "You became exactly who I hoped you would be." The simple acknowledgement struck Rachel with unexpected force. Throughout her military career, she had carried the shadow of her father's legacy, the decorated officer who had died heroically serving his country. That narrative had shaped her choices, her training, her deployments. Now that narrative had been rewritten. Jonathan Morgan hadn't died in 1991. He had been imprisoned for maintaining the principles he'd sworn to uphold. And Rachel hadn't simply followed in his footsteps. She had completed the mission he began, bringing light to a darkness that had persisted for over 3 decades. On television, Catherine was explaining the specific authorization documents for Project Helios, the signatures, the deployments, the calculated casualties deemed acceptable in pursuit of strategic advantage, the cold calculus of national security divorced from moral consideration. "Was it worth it?" Rachel asked quietly. "All those years, the price you paid." Jonathan considered the question with the careful deliberation that had become characteristic since his rescue. "Not for me to judge. One man's suffering against the truth being known." He shook his head slightly. "No mathematical formula for that." He reached across the table with still unsteady hands, grasping his daughter's fingers. "But finding you again, that would be worth any price." The simple declaration, free of melodrama or sentimentality, carried the weight of absolute conviction. It was the soldier's perspective: mission parameters, acceptable losses, ultimate objectives, applied to the most personal of contexts. Rachel returned the grip, feeling the fragile strength in her father's hands. Whatever challenges lay ahead, medical, legal, personal, they would face them together. The mission that had begun in Samara and stretched across 32 years had transformed from a search for evidence into something more fundamental: the reclamation of a family torn apart by forces they could barely comprehend. Outside the cabin, the world continued to absorb and respond to the Quicksilver revelations. Hearings would proceed, prosecutions would be pursued, reforms would be implemented. The systems that had allowed Project Helios to exist would be examined and hopefully reconstructed with greater transparency and accountability. But within the cabin's walls, another kind of reconstruction was taking place: the careful, patient rebuilding of a father-daughter relationship that had been interrupted when Rachel was just 3 years old. Each small moment, a shared meal, a conversation about her brother's life, the exchange of military experiences across generations, formed part of a bridge spanning the decades of separation. "There's somewhere I'd like to go," Jonathan said as Catherine's testimony concluded. "When the doctors say I'm strong enough." "Where?" Rachel asked. "Arlington, Section 60. His expression conveyed everything the words didn't. "To see Michael." Rachel nodded, understanding. Her brother's grave, unlike their father's memorial stone, contained a body, a life genuinely lost while serving the country both Morgans had sworn to protect. A visit would carry risks. They remained under protection while investigations continued. But it was a necessary pilgrimage. "We'll go," she promised. Together. Jonathan's eyes, so like her own, held a mixture of grief and determination. "The three of us should be together at least once." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting the cabin in warm golden light, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun with a chance encounter at Luigi's restaurant had unraveled a conspiracy spanning decades, exposing crimes that might otherwise have remained buried forever. The dog tag fragments, separated for 32 years, had finally been reunited, just as father and daughter had found each other against impossible odds. The evidence Jonathan had hidden had finally served its purpose, bringing light to operations conducted in deepest shadow. Outside, the world would continue to debate the implications of Project Helios, the balance between national security and moral principle between classified operations and public accountability. Those debates would shape policy legislation, international relations for years to come. But within the quiet sanctuary of the mountain cabin, Jonathan and Rachel Morgan had already reached their own reckoning, with the past, with each other, and with the principles that had sustained them through decades of separation. The road to recovery remained long, but the direction was clear. The truth, however long buried, had finally found the light. 32 years buried in shadow, yet truth finds a way to surface like water seeking light. The journey from Luigi's restaurant to that mountain cabin spanned more than miles. It crossed decades of silence of lives interrupted of principles tested against the harshest elements of power. What was gained? A father returned from the dead. Evidence that altered the course of history. Justice for those silenced in service to secrets deemed too dangerous for daylight. What was lost? A brother who never knew his father's fate. Decades that could never be reclaimed. Harper and others who carried their loyalty to the grave. And the cost measured not in years or lives alone, but in the quiet erosion of faith that occurs when those entrusted to protect become the very threat they were sworn to defend against. In the end, perhaps Jonathan Morgan's greatest victory wasn't exposing Project Helios or surviving his captivity, but in passing to his daughter the unbreakable compass that guided him through darkness, the understanding that some principles transcend orders, some truths demand sacrifice, and some bonds survive even the most determined efforts to sever them. How many other secrets lie buried beneath the medals and monuments we've built to honor sacrifice? How many other soldiers still wait in shadow, hoping someone remembers the mission isn't complete?